foot in the door. They don't start by asking for too much. They start small, a harmless favor, a tiny yes. Can you sign this petition? Can you take this short survey? Just a minute of your time. And you agree, because it seems polite, easy, innocent. But that's the trap. Just a quick pause. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to drop a comment below and let me know what stood out to you. If you enjoy thought-provoking content like this, consider subscribing to the Sleep Paradox channel. There's a lot more coming your way. Now let's continue. This is called the foot in the door technique, and it's one of the oldest psychological tricks used by cults, corporations, and con artists. The first yes opens the door. The second yes comes easier. The third one, you don't even notice anymore. What began as a tiny favor becomes a commitment. You're volunteering now, donating money, changing your beliefs. They didn't force you, they made you choose. That's what makes it powerful. The mind hates inconsistency. Once you say yes, your brain scrambles to stay loyal to that choice. You convince yourself that you wanted this all along. That's the real magic. You become your own captor. Salespeople use it. Politicians use it. Your manipulative ex used it. And the scariest part, they're not breaking any rules. They're just walking you into a cage, one polite step at a time. And by the time the door locks, you're smiling. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is psychological warfare, not through screaming or threats, but through rewriting your reality. It's one of the most insidious forms of manipulation because it doesn't just control what you do, it controls what you believe. It makes you doubt your memory, your perception, your emotions, until eventually you stop trusting yourself at all. The term comes from the 1944 film Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife into thinking she's losing her mind by subtly dimming the gaslights in their home and then denying it's happening. When she points it out, he tells her she's imagining things. The flickering isn't real. She is the problem. And soon she believes him. But the tactic predates the movie. In fact, one of the most disturbing historical examples comes from the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin. During the Great Purge of the 1930s, dissidents, intellectuals, even loyal citizens were arrested and sent to labor camps, often with no real evidence. But what made this system truly terrifying wasn't just the imprisonment. It was the psychological gaslighting that followed. Victims were forced to confess to crimes they didn't commit, told they were enemies of the state, saboteurs, traitors. The state would fabricate letters, rewrite transcripts, forge signatures. People were broken under interrogation, and many believed they were guilty by the end. Why? Because when everyone around you insists you're wrong, crazy, dangerous, you start to doubt yourself. That's how gaslighting works. Not by force, but by confusion. It begins subtly. You say something hurt you, they say you're too sensitive. You remember something clearly, they insist it never happened. You confront a lie, they call you paranoid, and they say it calmly, rationally. While you grow more distressed, more reactive. Now you look unstable. Now you feel unstable. And that's the goal, to push you to the edge, then blame you for falling. Psychologically, this exploits several deep mechanisms. One is cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that comes from holding two conflicting beliefs. You know something happened, but they insist it didn't. Over time, to resolve the discomfort, your brain starts aligning with their version, because it's easier than constant conflict. Another is epistemic trust, our built-in need to rely on others to help us interpret reality, especially those we are close to. When a trusted person repeatedly denies your reality, your brain adapts. It starts outsourcing certainty to the manipulator, even if it means betraying yourself. In modern life, gaslighting shows up everywhere. In toxic relationships, one partner constantly rewrites the past. You're remembering wrong. That's not what I meant. Why are you always so dramatic? Soon, the victim stops bringing things up altogether. In families, it can sound like, we never treated you that way. You're exaggerating. You always twist the truth. The child grows into an adult who questions every memory, every emotion, even the valid ones. In the workplace, it appears when abuse is reframed as feedback. Harassment becomes just a joke. You've burnout. becomes not being a team player. The problem is always you, never the system. And in authoritarian politics, gaslighting becomes mass scale. What you saw didn't happen. The media is lying. There were no victims. Leaders deny what's plainly visible until the public stops trusting their own eyes. And eventually, you start policing yourself. You catch your thoughts before you say them. You rehearse conversations before speaking, just to make sure you won't be accused of being emotional, unstable, wrong. You question your memory. You edit your instincts. You shrink. That's the deepest cut of gaslighting. They don't just lie to you, they make you lie to yourself. And once you abandon your own reality, they don't need to control you anymore. You'll do it for them. Love bombing. Humans are wired to respond to affection, to attention, to belonging. It's not weakness, it's biology. Emotional connection triggers the brain's reward system. It makes us feel safe, seen, important. And when that connection comes fast and hard, flooding every crack of loneliness, it's not just compelling, it's addictive. That's what makes love bombing so effective. It's not about genuine love, it's about overwhelming intensity. Used to create emotional dependence, it's a tactic that feels like a fantasy until it becomes a cage. At first, it looks perfect. Constant praise, endless compliments, grand gestures. You're everything I've ever wanted. No one has ever made me feel this way. You're my soulmate. They text non-stop. They talk about the future. After a week, it feels magical. But it's not magic. It's manipulation. And it's not designed to last. It's designed to hook you fast. One of the most infamous real-world examples comes from the People's Temple, led by cult leader Jim Jones. In the early 1970s, Jones lured in thousands of followers, not with threats, but with love. He promised equality, belonging, purpose. He called everyone family. He hugged people, praised them publicly, gave them nicknames. New members described feeling instantly accepted, like they had finally found home. But once they were in, once they were isolated in the jungle compound of Jonestown, far from the outside world, the love turned to control, surveillance, forced loyalty, psychological abuse, and eventually, mass death. Over 900 people died in a single day. Many drank poison willingly. Why? Because Jones had created the illusion of perfect love, then tied it to absolute submission. Leaving felt like betrayal, like abandoning the one place they felt valued. That's the trap of love bombing. It works by hijacking the dopamine system, the same system activated by drugs and gambling. The brain floods with reward chemicals during intense affection. But when the affection is suddenly withdrawn, which it always is, the emotional crash creates panic. You don't just miss them, you crave them, and you'll do anything to get that high back. This tactic shows up in abusive relationships where a partner overwhelms you with love, then starts to withdraw. When you pull away, they flood you again. It's not kindness, it's conditioning. It shows up in cults, where recruits are welcomed with celebration, hugs, constant affirmation, until the indoctrination begins. Now loyalty is expected. Dissent is betrayal. Even companies and bosses do it. You're showered with praise during the hiring process, called family, told you're essential. But once you're inside, long hours, no boundaries, no support. The affection wasn't authentic. It was bait. And the most disturbing part, you blame yourself when the love fades. You think you did something wrong. So you try harder, you stay longer, you shrink more, just to feel wanted again. But that love was never real. It was a hook, a performance, a trap. And now that you're caught, they don't need to love you anymore. They just need you to chase the memory of it. Scarcity Trap. They make you believe you're running out of time, running out of love, running out of chances. And once that belief takes hold, they don't have to take anything from you. You'll give it up yourself. This is the power of the scarcity trap, one of the oldest manipulations in human history. It works not by force, but by urgency. It doesn't need to be real. It only needs to feel real. Because when your mind believes something is limited, rare, or slipping away, your brain stops analyzing. It starts chasing. That instinct runs deep. In our evolutionary past, scarcity meant survival. Food, shelter, mates, the rarest resources were the most prized. Our brains evolved to treat limited things as more valuable. And now, manipulators use that ancient instinct against us. You see it in totalitarian regimes like North Korea, where the state controls every resource: food, information, movement, even trust. Under Kim Jong-il, basic necessities became rare commodities. People didn't question the system. They scrambled to stay alive. In that atmosphere of constant deprivation, even pain started to feel like safety. The regime didn't have to offer joy. They only had to convince people that anything outside their control was worse, and it worked. In abusive relationships, the same psychology plays out. They pull away emotionally. They become cold, unavailable. Suddenly, every kind word is a gift. Every moment of affection becomes rare and priceless. You find yourself doing more, sacrificing more, just to get back to where you started. In cults, it's spiritual scarcity. Only they have the truth. Only they can save you. Questioning them means losing everything, even your soul. Even in capitalism, it's everywhere. Only 3 left in stock. Sale ends at midnight. Act now or miss out forever. Scarcity bypasses logic. It activates your amygdala, floods your system with cortisol, and hijacks the thinking part of your brain. You don't weigh pros and cons. You act before it's too late. And that's the dark trick. It doesn't matter if the scarcity is real. You feel it. And once you feel it, they own you. Psychologically, this is compounded by reactance bias. The more your freedom feels limited, the more desperate you become to keep what little you think you have. Combine that with sunk cost fallacy, and now you're defending a life that's hurting you simply because you've already given so much to keep it. They don't need to trap you with chains. They just convince you the world outside is empty. Then you'll cling to the cage and call it home. Fear appeal. Fear is primal. Before language, before tools, before civilization, we feared. It's the mind's oldest alarm system, designed not to think, but to react. Hear a twig snap in the forest. You freeze, you run, you survive. But in modern life, fear doesn't just keep us safe. It can be used to control us, not by protecting us from danger, but by convincing us we're always in danger. That's the core of fear appeal. The deliberate use of fear to override reason, enforce obedience, and erase resistance. It doesn't matter if the threat is real. It only matters that you believe it could be. History has given us some of the most terrifying examples of this tactic in its rawest form. One of the darkest comes from ancient Rome, under the rule of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, around 82 BCE. Sulla seized power not just with violence, but with public fear. He created a system called the proscriptions, literal lists of people who were to be killed on sight. These names were carved into stone and posted in the Roman Forum for everyone to see. Anyone could be on the list. No trial, no defense. And here's the most horrifying part. Sulla offered rewards, cash, land, political favor, to those who killed the names on the list. Even more if you turned in someone who was hiding a proscribed person. You got their property. Overnight, fear rewrote society. Sons betrayed fathers. Friends reported friends. Neighbors executed neighbors. Not because they hated them, but because they feared being next. Or worse, they saw an opportunity to gain. People didn't just submit to fear, they served it. They became extensions of it. That's what this tactic does. It doesn't just silence resistance, it makes fear contagious. And this same tactic plays out in toxic relationships, cults, even governments, in abusive homes. It starts with quiet threats. If you leave me, I'll destroy you. No one else will want you. You think your life is bad now? Try surviving without me. The fear isn't always shouted. Often, it's whispered or just implied. Psychologically, fear appeal hijacks the amygdala, flooding the nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline. It shuts down the logical brain, replacing thought with reflex. You stop evaluating. You start surviving. your survival often looks like compliance. In cults, fear is built into doctrine. Leave, and you're cursed. Question, and you're exiled. In totalitarian regimes, fear is law. Criticize, and you vanish. In families, fear is guilt-wrapped. If you speak out, you'll ruin everything. You'll kill your mother with stress. And here's where it turns tragic. Once fear is internalized, no one needs to threaten you anymore. You do the job yourself. You second-guess your escape. You rationalize staying. You live small, silent, careful. You start believing that avoiding punishment is the same as being safe. But safety built on fear isn't safety. It's surrender. Fear doesn't just control your actions. It reshapes your reality. And if someone controls your fear, they control you. Authority bias. We're trained to listen to power, badges, titles, lab coats, expensive suits. The uniform changes, but the effect is the same. We assume they know better. We assume they're right. That's authority bias, the reflex to trust and obey people who appear to have power, status, or expertise. And it's one of the most quietly dangerous tricks in all of dark psychology. You don't question the doctor, you follow the prescription. You don't question the CEO, you follow the strategy. You don't question the man in uniform, you follow orders. Even when something feels wrong, even when it goes against your values, you obey, because your brain tells you, they must know something I don't. That's the trap. And it doesn't just control what you do, it controls what you don't do. You don't speak up. You don't resist. You don't even pause to think, because the person giving the command looks confident, sounds educated, stands taller than you. And in that moment, that's all it takes. Dark manipulators know this. That's why they wrap themselves in credentials. They drop names, wear expensive watches, speak with certainty, not to earn your trust, but to shortcut it. Because once you believe they're the authority, you surrender the most dangerous thing you have, your ability to question, and they'll exploit that obedience. They'll push policies that harm. They'll sell lies disguised as science. They'll make you complicit in things you never thought you'd agree to. And you'll go along with it, not because you're weak, but because the human brain is wired to follow what it perceives as power. The darkest part. If something goes wrong, you won't blame them. You'll blame yourself. You'll say, I should have known. I should have spoken up. But in the moment, you didn't feel manipulated. You felt guided, safe, protected. That's why authority bias is so effective. It doesn't feel like coercion. It feels like trust. But the truth is this: anyone can wear a uniform. Anyone can speak with confidence. Not everyone deserves your mind. Incremental commitment. They don't ask for too much up front. That would scare you. Instead, they start small. A tiny request, a small task, a minor compromise. You agree, it feels harmless. Then they ask for a little more, and a little more, after that. And before you realize it, you've said yes to something you would have refused on day one. This is incremental commitment, the psychological trap that builds obedience one step at a time. It's often called the boiling frog method. Drop a frog into boiling water, and it jumps out. But heat the water slowly, and it stays. It adapts until it's cooked, without ever resisting. Humans work the same way. We tolerate discomfort in small doses. We normalize the unacceptable by adjusting to it gradually. A little overwork becomes routine. A little disrespect becomes familiar. A little boundary violation becomes the new normal. You stay, you endure. You tell yourself, it's not that bad. But it is. It's just happening. Slowly enough that you don't notice you're sinking. Cult leaders use it to erode free will. Abusive partners use it to isolate and dominate. Governments use it to chip away at rights. Each new step feels like just one more thing, until it's everything. Until the person you used to be is buried under all the things you quietly allowed. The dark genius of this trap is that it never feels like a trap. It feels like patience, compromise, growth. You don't even realize how far you've gone, because you never took a leap. You took 1,000 tiny steps, and now the exit feels further away than the next concession. By the time you say, I can't take this anymore, you've already taken too much. You've already been cooked. That's the power of incremental commitment. It doesn't ask for a decision, it builds a pattern, and by the time you're ready to resist, the pattern has become your life. Emotional anchoring. This trick starts with emotion. Big, intense emotion. A moment that hits hard. Joy, fear, shame, excitement. And once you're in it, they attach their message to that feeling. Now the message isn't just information. It's fused to your nervous system. This is emotional anchoring, the act of tying a specific emotion to a person, product, idea, or memory. It's how con artists make you feel like they're your savior. It's how abusive partners make you associate love with pain. It's how propaganda makes you feel proud when you obey and guilty when you question. Here's how it works. First, they trigger an emotional spike. They flatter you, praise you, or scare you. They create a peak state, something your brain pays attention to. Then they introduce what they want you to believe or remember, and your mind connects the dots, not rationally, emotionally. It stores the message next to the feeling. Over time, it becomes automatic. You hear their voice and feel safe. You see their logo and feel excitement. You hear their warning and feel fear, not because it's true, but because it's anchored. The emotion repeats, and your reaction becomes reflex. Advertisers do this constantly. That song playing during the happy commercial, that's the anchor. Later, when you hear it again, you feel good, and you don't even know why. Manipulators use it too. They create cycles of chaos and comfort. It hurt you, then save you, tear you down, then build you up, and soon, your brain links both the pain and the relief to them. That's the trap. You stop asking if they're good for you. You just feel something when they're around, and that feeling overrides logic. You trust them because your body remembers comfort. You crave them because your mind associates them with emotional highs. But it's not connection, it's conditioning. The darkest part. They don't need to be around forever. Once the anchor is set, they can step back, and you'll still respond. Like a switch. Like a dog trained to salivate at the sound of a bell. Except the bell is their voice, their approval, their silence. Anchoring doesn't just influence how you feel, it controls when you feel and who you attach it to. And by the time you figure it out, the trigger is already inside you. Social proof. People don't like to think alone. When we're uncertain, we look around and copy what others are doing. That's social proof. The idea that if many people believe or do something, it must be right, safe, true. The term comes from psychologist Robert Cialdini, who studied how easily people are influenced by the behavior of others. He found that in moments of doubt, we follow the crowd, not because the crowd is smart, but because our brains are lazy and fear being wrong. You see a restaurant with a line outside, you assume the food's good. A product has thousands of 5-star reviews. You trust it without thinking. You hear applause during a speech. You join in, even if you didn't understand the point. This isn't logic, it's instinct, and it's dangerous, because manipulators know how to fake it. They buy fake followers, fake testimonials, fake likes. They pay actors to pretend they believe. They plant laughter in the audience. They flood comment sections with praise. And once enough people seem convinced, your defenses drop. You go along, not because you're persuaded, but because you don't want to be the outlier. That's the trap. Social proof gives you comfort, but it steals your judgment. You stop asking, is this true? And start asking, am I the only one who doesn't get it? This is how cults grow, how mass hysteria spreads, how lies go viral. All it takes is a crowd, or the illusion of one, and people follow. It works, even when the stakes are high. In the 1960s, psychologist Solomon Asch showed that people would intentionally give the wrong answer in a group just to fit in. Not because they were convinced, because they didn't want to stand alone. That's the dark power of social proof. It hijacks your fear of being different. It turns silence into consent. It turns doubt into submission. It turns your mind into a mirror, reflecting the beliefs of those around you, even when they're wrong. And once you trust the crowd more than your own thoughts, you're not thinking anymore. you're following, and they've already won. The halo effect. Someone looks good, speaks well, dresses sharp, and before they say anything meaningful, you already assume they're smart, kind, trustworthy, competent. That's the halo effect. A mental shortcut where one positive trait, usually appearance or charisma, spills over into everything else. And it's one of the most quietly dangerous biases manipulators rely on. The term was coined by psychologist Edward Thorndike in the 1920s. He noticed that military commanders consistently rated soldiers higher across the board, intelligence, leadership, discipline, just because they had a pleasant appearance. The mind was creating a halo. One glowing trait made everything else look better. Manipulators use this constantly. Step 1. Polish the surface. They know that if they look confident, clean, attractive, or authoritative, your brain will do the rest of the work. You'll fill in the blanks. You'll assume competence where there is none. You'll assume honesty where there are only rehearsed lies. Step 2. Keep the illusion consistent. They mirror your emotions. They speak with confidence. They name-drop degrees, titles, awards, even if they're meaningless. Their entire persona is designed to trigger admiration. The goal isn't to earn your trust, it's to skip your skepticism. And then comes step 3, exploitation. You trust their advice, even when it costs you. You give them the benefit of the doubt, even when the red flags are obvious. You make excuses for their mistakes, because your brain keeps telling you they don't seem like the type. That's the trap. The halo effect makes you blind to flaws and loyal to appearances. It replaces thinking with feeling, and once they've planted that halo in your mind, they can say almost anything and you'll believe it. Not because of what they said, but because of who you think they are. The darkest part, this bias doesn't just make you vulnerable, it makes you defensive. If someone tries to warn you, you resist. You defend the manipulator. You say things like, they're just misunderstood, or you don't know them like I do, because you're not protecting them. You're protecting the version of them your brain invented. The halo effect doesn't just distort your vision, it becomes your vision. And by the time the mask slips, the damage is already done. Mirroring. You meet someone new, and it feels like they've known you forever. They like the same music, say the same things, share your values, your wounds, your weird little quirks. It's electric, intimate, uncanny. You think, finally, someone who truly gets me. But what if they're not getting to know you? What if they're copying you? This is mirroring, the act of reflecting your emotions, thoughts, interests, and even your pain back at you. But in dark psychology, it's not done to build connection. It's done to manufacture trust, to create fast, artificial intimacy, so they can bypass your defenses and slip inside your mind. The tactic works because humans are wired to bond with similarity. It's called the similarity attraction effect. People who seem like us, who agree with us, validate us, echo us, feel safer, more familiar. And when someone mirrors us perfectly, it triggers a powerful illusion. They must be the real thing. That's what makes it so dangerous. One of the most unsettling examples of manipulative mirroring comes from cult recruitment techniques, particularly those used by groups like NXWTM or Heaven's Gate. New members were not coerced. They were mirrored. Leaders and high-ranking members would study a recruit's language, posture, even tone, then reflect it. I've struggled with that too. I used to feel lost like you. I'm just like you. That's why this saved me. The target felt deeply seen, even loved. But what they were seeing was their own reflection. The cult wasn't connecting. It was mimicking. And once the emotional bond was strong enough, the manipulation began. In abusive relationships, it often starts the same way. A partner mirrors your dreams, traumas, and beliefs. You're everything I've ever wanted. No one's ever understood me like you. You feel a magnetic pull, not realizing you're falling for a projection. And when the real personality emerges, cold, critical, controlling, it's too late. You're already attached to the version of yourself they showed you. In sales, it becomes a psychological tool. Mimic the customer's language, values, even body language. and they're more likely to say yes. In politics, it's even more insidious. Leaders mirror public fears, frustrations, and pain, not to heal them, but to harvest them. They become what people want to see, just long enough to gain power. Mirroring works by triggering your oxytocin response, the neurochemical of trust and bonding. Your brain relaxes. Your guard drops. You open up. But the manipulator isn't opening back. They're studying, and every time you speak, they get better at playing you. The worst part, the version of them you fell in love with, never existed. It was you, fed back to you, wrapped in validation and charm. And once they no longer need the mask, they take it off and watch you grieve a person who was never real. Triangulation. Triangulation is a power move, not through domination, but through division. It's when a manipulator inserts a third party into a relationship to destabilize it. Instead of resolving conflict directly, they redirect it, subtly comparing, referencing, or involving someone else to shift the emotional balance. The goal is to create tension, competition, and confusion, all while keeping themselves at the center of control. It doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it's a name dropped in passing. My ex never had a problem with this. Even your boss thought I handled it better than you. Your sister agrees you're being too emotional. But beneath that calm tone is a psychological weapon. Now you're not arguing with them. You're arguing with someone who isn't even in the room. Triangulation works because it taps into core social and emotional instincts. Humans are tribal. We're wired to seek inclusion and avoid exclusion. When someone introduces a third party as better, closer, or more reasonable, it triggers social comparison bias and attachment insecurity. Suddenly, you feel threatened, not just by the conflict, but by the fear of losing your position in the relationship. You don't want to be replaced. You don't want to lose connection. So instead of addressing the problem, you start fighting to reclaim your value. Historically, this tactic has been used to manipulate entire systems of power. Under Louis XIV of France, the monarchy intentionally fostered competition among nobles. Instead of allowing alliances to form, Louis kept them divided, granting selective favors, shifting influence, and quietly turning allies into rivals. It wasn't chaos. It was control. While the nobles fought for status, Louis ruled unquestioned. The same tactic shows up in modern relationships. A parent compares one sibling to another. Why can't you be more like her? A romantic partner uses a friend or ex as a silent measuring stick. A friend praises you one day and praises someone else in front of you the next, watching how you react. You're being ranked, you're being studied, and you're being pulled into a competition you didn't sign up for. In toxic workplaces, triangulation becomes policy. One employee is quietly favored, another is subtly undermined. Promotions are hinted at but never clarified. Colleagues are left guessing where they stand. Tension builds, unity breaks, and management stays untouched at the center of the chaos they engineered. In cults and authoritarian groups, triangulation becomes structural. Members are encouraged to report each other. Loyalty is rewarded selectively. Doubt is punished socially. Everyone is watching everyone else, and no one feels safe. But here's the dark genius of it. Triangulation doesn't just damage trust, it redirects your anger. Instead of seeing the manipulator clearly, you start resenting the third party. You feel jealous, insecure, competitive. And in that storm of emotion, you stop asking the most important question: why am I being made to fight for what I should already have? Because in a healthy relationship, love isn't a contest. Trust isn't something you audition for. And if someone makes you feel replaceable, it's not a mistake, it's a strategy. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is what happens when your brain holds two opposing beliefs at the same time and can't stand the tension between them. It creates psychological discomfort, like an internal alarm going off. One part of you knows something is wrong, but another part of you is already attached to it, emotionally, socially, or morally. So instead of resolving the conflict, your brain finds a way to rationalize it. That's the danger. You don't always run from the lie. Sometimes, you reshape your truth to protect it. In dark psychology, cognitive dissonance isn't just an accident. It's a weapon. Manipulators create dissonance, then control how you resolve it. They put you in situations where the facts contradict your beliefs, your values clash with your actions, your pain doesn't match the love you think you deserve. And when the discomfort becomes too much to bear, you adjust your reality to escape it. This is how people stay in toxic relationships, how they justify cruelty, how they follow orders they don't agree with. Not because they're weak, but because their mind has convinced them there's no other way to survive. One of the most chilling real-world examples comes from Jonestown, the mass suicide in 1978, led by cult leader Jim Jones. For years, followers were taught that Jonestown was a utopia, a place of justice, family, purpose. But behind the scenes, there was suffering, starvation, surveillance, abuse. People knew things weren't right, but they had already given everything, their homes, their identities, their relationships, back in the US. They had to believe it was still good because the alternative, that they had been deceived, was too psychologically devastating. So when Jones told them to drink poison for the revolution, many didn't resist. Some believed. Others couldn't bear the shame of realizing it had all been a lie. They resolved the dissonance not by escaping, but by surrendering. That's how deep this trap goes. In relationships, this might sound like, he loves me, even if he hurts me. She's under stress. She didn't mean to scream. I know it's wrong, but maybe it's my fault. You feel mistreated, but you're emotionally invested. You don't want to believe they're cruel, so your mind rewrites the story to make it fit. That's dissonance in motion. Psychologically, this process is fueled by confirmation bias and sunk cost fallacy. You start ignoring red flags and doubling down on your original belief because admitting you were wrong feels more painful than enduring the damage. Over time, this distorts your boundaries, your reality, even your identity. In authoritarian regimes, this tactic becomes systemic. Citizens are told their leader is just. Even as corruption grows, the dissonance builds, but protest feels dangerous. So the brain adapts. It's not perfect, but at least it's stable. The media is lying. It's not that bad. The discomfort is numbed with propaganda. Cults use the same method. They preach love while enforcing control. Followers are punished, then told it's for their own growth. Instead of leaving, they internalize the harm as proof of their loyalty. And the longer the dissonance remains unresolved, the deeper the damage. Because now you're not just defending the manipulator, you're defending the version of yourself who chose to stay. To walk away would mean confronting not only the truth, but the cost of denying it. That's the final twist. The pain you swallowed becomes the proof you use to stay loyal. And you don't see it as manipulation. You call it love. You call it growth. You call it home. False consensus trick. People want to be right, but more than that, they want to belong. And when we're unsure of what's true, we often look to others for confirmation. If everyone seems to agree, it must be true. If no one's objecting, then maybe it's just you. This is the foundation of the false consensus effect, a powerful psychological illusion where we assume that others think like we do, or that we should think like they do. And in the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon. The false consensus trick is when a manipulator creates the illusion that everyone agrees with them, even when they don't. They fabricate majority opinion to isolate dissenters, suppress opposition, and pressure people into compliance. The goal is simple: make you afraid to be the only one who disagrees. The term was coined by Lee Ross, a Stanford social psychologist, who found that people consistently overestimate how widely their beliefs are shared. This isn't just vanity, it's evolutionary. In early tribal societies, survival meant sticking with the group. Disagreeing wasn't just risky, it could get you exiled. Your brain learned to associate agreement with safety and disagreement with danger. Manipulators use this reflex against you. Historically, one of the most terrifying examples comes from Nazi Germany. Hitler's rise to power was built on a manufactured narrative that Germans everywhere supported the movement. State-controlled media broadcasted mass support, parades, propaganda, symbols. Dissenters were silenced quickly and brutally, not just to punish them, but to erase the evidence that anyone disagreed. the illusion of total agreement was preserved. People went along, not because they all believed, but because they thought everyone else did. And in that silence, evil flourished. This tactic is still alive today. In cults, it looks like groupthink. The leader speaks, and everyone nods. You doubt, but you say nothing, because no one else does. What you don't see is that everyone else is thinking the same thing. Is it just me? In abusive relationships, the manipulator claims everyone thinks you're difficult. Even your friends say you're the problem. You never hear these voices, but that doesn't matter. The suggestion is enough to make you doubt yourself. In social media, false consensus is created with likes, bots, fake comments. You see a post go viral and assume it reflects public opinion when it may have been artificially boosted. The illusion of majority creates pressure. Don't be the only one who disagrees. You'll look crazy. You'll be outcast. Psychologically, this triggers pluralistic ignorance, where everyone thinks they're the only one who disagrees, so no one speaks up. Everyone is waiting for someone else to object, but no one does. So the lie wins by default. And here's the darkest part. Once you believe you're alone in your thinking, you start changing your beliefs, not because they were wrong, but because they were unpopular. You reshape your identity to avoid rejection. You betray your instincts to preserve inclusion. That's not consensus, that's coercion. And when silence becomes a strategy, truth becomes whatever the loudest voice says it is. Future faking. They don't trap you with what's happening now. They trap you with what might happen next. The dream, the promise, the someday. That's future faking. Future faking is when a manipulator talks about a shared future, marriage, success, emotional healing, a better life, not as a plan, but as a tool. They're not trying to move forward. They're trying to keep you in place. They give you a vision, then weaponize your hope to extract loyalty, time, silence, or obedience. Psychologically, this taps into temporal discounting, the tendency of the human brain to prefer future rewards over present reality. We're wired to endure discomfort now if we believe in a bigger payoff later. Manipulators know this, so they sell you the future to distract you from the present. In abusive relationships, it starts with promises. We're going to get through this. I just need to fix a few things. Once I get the promotion, everything will change. So you stay, you wait, you give more of yourself to a person who's giving you nothing but delay. In cults, future faking becomes doctrine. Enlightenment is coming. Salvation is near. Utopia is on the horizon. But only if you give more, obey more, sacrifice more. The promised future becomes a leash, and questioning it becomes betrayal. In business, it looks like you're next in line for a raise. We'll promote you soon. Stick around. Big things are coming. It keeps you loyal to a job that drains you because you've been trained to believe your suffering is an investment. And in politics, it becomes propaganda. Leaders promise transformation, justice, prosperity, dignity, but they never deliver because the promise was never meant to be kept. It was meant to keep you passive, quiet, obedient, while they do whatever they want. This tactic is devastating because it exploits one of the most powerful human forces, hope. Your brain releases dopamine, not only when you achieve a goal, but when you anticipate one. And future fakers keep you addicted to that anticipation. They reward you with visions, not action. The cruelest part. When you start asking questions, they offer you more dreams. The wedding, the house, the apology tour, the redemption arc. You get just enough fantasy to keep your feet glued to the ground. And by the time you realize the future isn't coming, you've already spent years compromising your present. That's not a vision, that's a cage built from illusions. And the longer you stay, the more your hope becomes the very thing that enslaves you. Learned helplessness. There is a point where people stop fighting, not because they've run out of options, but because they've stopped believing options exist. This is learned helplessness, a psychological condition where repeated exposure to uncontrollable pain, failure, or oppression teaches a person that resistance is useless. And once that belief takes root, the cage doesn't need to be locked. They won't try to leave. The concept was first identified by psychologist Martin Seligman in 1967 through a disturbing experiment. Dogs were placed in a box and subjected to electric shocks. In the first phase, they were restrained. They couldn't escape. Eventually, they stopped trying. But in the next phase, the barriers were removed. The dogs could have jumped out easily. They didn't. They lay down, whimpered, took the pain, not because they were physically trapped, but because their minds had already accepted defeat. And what Seligman discovered in dogs shows up in humans everywhere. In abusive relationships, victims are broken down over time. First comes the cruelty, then the confusion, then the unpredictability. Every time they resist, they're punished. Every time they hope, they're betrayed. Eventually, they stop trying. They don't leave, not because they want to stay, but because they've been taught that leaving doesn't work. You see it in long-term poverty, in political oppression, in systemic injustice. People stop speaking out, stop seeking help, stop believing in change. It's not weakness, it's neurological adaptation. Chronic stress damages the brain's ability to assess risk and take action. The prefrontal cortex dulls, the nervous system shuts down, and the silence that follows isn't peace, it's despair. In cults and authoritarian systems, learned helplessness is cultivated on purpose. Followers are isolated, overworked, humiliated, and punished. Promises are made and broken. Rules shift without warning. Loyalty is never enough. And slowly, people forget how to say no, even in their own minds. The leader becomes God. The abuse becomes normal. The thought of escape becomes unthinkable. In families, it's harder to see. A child raised with constant criticism, shame, or conditional love begins to internalize powerlessness. They grow into adults who can't speak up, can't set boundaries, can't ask for more, because they learn that wanting anything will only lead to pain. And here's the darkest truth. The damage isn't done by the bars around you. It's done by the voice inside you that whispers. It's, "Cest, there's no point. This is just how things are. You deserve this." That voice wasn't born in you. It was put there. And the longer it stays, the more your silence becomes your prison. They don't need to hold you down. They just need you to stop standing up. False urgency. False urgency is the illusion that you must act now or lose everything. It's a forced rush, a pressure campaign, a manipulated panic where hesitation feels fatal and thinking feels dangerous. The tactic is simple. If you can't pause, you can't process. And if you can't process, someone else gets to make the decision for you. False urgency exploits your brain's emergency system. It taps into loss aversion, the psychological principle that people are more motivated by the fear of losing something than by the hope of gaining it. It's why countdowns work, why fake deadlines are effective, why fear-based decisions feel necessary, even when they're wrong. One of the darkest historical examples occurred in 1933, when Adolf Hitler used a manufactured emergency to seize extraordinary power. After the Reichstag fire, which was likely orchestrated or opportunistically used by the Nazis, Hitler declared that Germany was under immediate threat. He rushed the Reichstag fire decree into law, suspending civil liberties, enabling mass arrests, and silencing opposition. The public, already panicked, was told this was temporary, just a reaction. But it wasn't. The urgency was false. The power grab was permanent. That's how this tactic works. Not by lying directly, but by controlling timing. They don't give you a moment to breathe. They fill that moment with fear. In relationships, false urgency sounds like, if you don't forgive me right now, we're over. If you don't trust me this second, I'll walk away. There's no time to think, just say yes. In cults, it's constant. We must act now. The world is ending. The window of salvation is closing. Urgency creates obedience. Because once the clock is ticking, fear replaces thought. In manipulative sales, it's everywhere. Only two left. Final offer. Your chance is slipping away. Most of it is fiction, but your nervous system can't tell the difference. It feels like survival. This tactic works by hijacking the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Urgency floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol. It narrows attention. It silences doubt. You act fast, And often, you act wrong. Because here's what the manipulator knows. If you had time to think, you'd say no. If you had time to reflect, you'd walk away. So they make sure you don't have time at all. The most dangerous choices are rarely made under pressure. They're made under panic. That's what false urgency creates. Not clarity, not direction, just panic that someone else can profit from. And the cruel twist, you don't just lose control of your time, you lose control of your judgment. You wake up days, months, years later, wondering how you ended up here, only to realize you never chose this, you were rushed into it. The guilt trip. Guilt is a social emotion, one of the earliest we learn as children. It's the internal weight we feel when we believe we've hurt someone, broken a rule, or fallen short of who we're supposed to be. In healthy environments, guilt keeps us kind, honest, accountable. But in the hands of a manipulator, guilt becomes something else. Not a guide, a leash. The guilt trip is the tactic of using guilt to coerce, silence, or control someone. The message is subtle, but sharp. If you don't do what I want, you're hurting me. It's not logic. It's not negotiation. It's emotional blackmail, designed to make you question your morality, not their behavior. This tactic works so well because it targets identity. We don't want to be seen as selfish, ungrateful, or disloyal. So when someone says, "After everything I've done for you," or "You're going to abandon me now," we freeze. The conflict isn't about the situation anymore. It's about who we are. And manipulators use that shift to their advantage. In family dynamics, this trick is ancient. Parents guilt children into obedience. "Do you know how much I sacrificed for you? You're breaking my heart. This is how you repay me." The child learns not just to obey, but to associate boundaries with cruelty, and that lesson echoes for years. Historically, you see entire systems shaped by guilt. In religious cults, guilt becomes doctrine. You were born sinful. You owe everything to the group. To question is to betray. Followers live in fear not just of punishment, but of being seen as morally wrong. They give more, endure more, not because they want to, but because they've been convinced that to stop would make them a monster. Psychologically, this taps into introjected guilt. When external judgments become internal voices, you start policing yourself, not because the manipulator is watching, but because their language has become your conscience. You second-guess your boundaries. You apologize for having needs. You stay quiet, not because you agree, but because you're ashamed to speak. In romantic relationships, guilt trips become routine. "I guess I just don't matter to you anymore. If you loved me, you'd understand. You're the reason I'm unhappy." You become the villain in a story you didn't write. And to clear your name, you give in. Over and over again. In workplaces, guilt is framed as loyalty. You're letting the team down. "I thought you were committed." Real professionals don't complain. And suddenly, burnout feels like failure. Taking care of yourself feels like betrayal. But this tactic doesn't just distort your decisions. It rewrites your reflection until you no longer ask, "Is this fair?" You only ask, "Am I a bad person for wanting something different?" Because that's what the guilt trip does best. It doesn't chain your hands. It stains your conscience and leaves you carrying the weight of someone else's expectations as if they were your own sins. The double bind. You and a friend are walking into a conversation you can't win. No matter what you say, it'll be used against you. Stay silent. You're cold. Speak up. You're aggressive. Say no. You're selfish. Say yes. You're weak. Welcome to the double bind. This is a psychological trap where every option is a setup. No matter which path you take, the outcome hurts you because the structure itself is rigged. The concept was first introduced by anthropologist Gregory Bateson in the 1950s during studies of dysfunctional family dynamics. He noticed children were being given conflicting demands. Speak your mind, but also don't talk back. Be honest, but don't hurt my feelings. These contradictory messages left them paralyzed, anxious, guilty, and confused. That's how dark manipulators use it, not to give you a choice, but to create the illusion of choice while punishing you either way. It starts with mixed signals. They ask you to be open, then punish you for disagreeing. They say, do what makes you happy, but guilt trip you when it's not what they wanted. They pull you in, then punish you for being too close, or push you away, then blame you for not trying harder. Over time, the rules change so fast you stop trying to play. You second guess everything, and eventually, you start asking them what to say, what to feel, how to move. That's the goal. Complete dependence. Toxic partners do this to gain control. You're always on trial. If you're affectionate, you're needy. If you're distant, you're cold. Every reaction becomes evidence against you, so you learn to shrink, to hesitate, to wait for direction. But direction never comes. Only correction. It happens in workplaces too. You're told to take initiative, then criticized for overstepping. You're told to follow orders, then blamed for lacking leadership. Every move is a liability, and eventually you freeze. That's the dark brilliance of the double bind. It makes you feel like the failure, even though failure was the only possible outcome. You're not disobeying, you're being set up. And when you finally break, when the pressure becomes too much, they'll say, see, I told you you couldn't handle it. Because in a double bind, collapse isn't a surprise, it's the plan. The door in the face technique. A stranger asks you for $500. You're shocked. Of course you say no. Then they ask, okay, what about just $20? And suddenly, you say, yes. That's not negotiation. That's manipulation. That's the door in the face technique. Oh, it's a psychological tactic where someone makes an intentionally outrageous request first, knowing you'll reject it, so their real goal, which comes next, seems reasonable by comparison. It feels like compromise. It feels like fairness, but you've just been steered. The term was coined by social psychologist Robert Cialdini in the 1970s, based on studies showing that people are more likely to agree to a second, smaller request after turning down a larger one. Why? Because your brain tries to balance the social scales. You said no. Now you feel like you owe them something. That's the pressure point, guilt and contrast. Manipulators use this constantly. A cult might demand total isolation from your family, and when you push back, they compromise by only cutting contact for a few weeks. You agree. It feels like a win. But it wasn't your boundary. It was theirs, just slightly softened. In relationships, they'll accuse you of never being there for them, demand your time 24/7. You say no. Then they shift. Okay, just cancel your weekend plans. Compared to the original demand, it seems reasonable, so you cancel, you submit, and the pattern continues. In sales, you'll be offered a bloated package deal you clearly don't want. When you decline, the salesperson offers a discounted version, which was their real goal all along. You walk away, thinking you got a deal. They walk away with your money. It's not just about the ask, it's about the framing. If they had led with the smaller request, you would have said no. But now, it feels like relief, a middle ground, a fair exchange. That's the brilliance and the cruelty of this tactic. They manufacture the pressure, they invent the contrast, and you walk right through the door, thinking it was your idea. Because it's not just about getting what they want, it's about making you feel good while giving it to them. Projection. Projection is when a person takes their own thoughts, feelings, or behaviors and attributes them to someone else. It's not always conscious. It's a psychological defense mechanism designed to protect the ego. But in manipulation, projection becomes something darker, a weapon of confusion and reversal. The manipulator doesn't just lie about you. They tell the truth about themselves, but assign it to you. The term was first explored by Sigmund Freud, who saw projection as a way people avoid confronting their own shameful impulses. Instead of acknowledging envy, aggression, or deceit, the mind ejects the trait and sees it in others. I'm not cruel, you are. I'm not cheating. You must be hiding something. And when done deliberately, it's devastating. In abusive relationships, projection often follows the same pattern. The cheater accuses you of infidelity. The angry partner calls you unstable. The manipulator says, "You're trying to control me," while they dominate every aspect of your life. You start defending yourself against things you never did, while they walk away clean. Psychologically, this creates gaslight-adjacent dissonance. You know you're not doing these things, but the accusations come with such conviction, and often so early, so frequently, that you begin to internalize them. You become consumed with proving your innocence, trying to stay calm, trying not to match the behavior they're accusing you of. But that's the trap. Projection puts you on trial for someone else's crimes, and the more you defend yourself, the more suspicious you look. Historically, projection has been used to justify violence and genocide. In Nazi Germany, Jews were accused of corrupting society, plotting in secret, hoarding power. All the while, the Nazi regime was doing exactly that. Propaganda portrayed the victims as dangerous, because seeing themselves as the aggressors was unacceptable. Projecting the threat made their actions feel like defense, not atrocity. In modern politics, it's still everywhere. The corrupt accuse others of dishonesty. The divisive claim to be the unifiers. The abuser cries victim. This isn't confusion, it's strategy. Because if you can frame yourself as the one under attack, you never have to take responsibility. In families, projection passes down through generations. A parent calls a child selfish, while demanding endless obedience. A sibling accuses you of being dramatic, while exploding at every disagreement. You grow up thinking your emotions are the problem, not realizing you've been cast in a role someone else was too ashamed to admit they played. And here's how it fractures you. You begin questioning not only your actions, but your character. You see their flaws, but you feel their shame. You start believing that defending yourself is aggression, that setting boundaries is cruelty, that being misunderstood is your fault. Because projection isn't just misdirection, it's psychological transference. And if you're not careful, you don't just carry their blame, you carry their identity. The illusion of choice. You're given two options. You pick one, thinking you've made a decision, but both choices were designed by the same person. Both lead exactly where they wanted you, and the outcome was never yours to control. That's the illusion of choice, one of the most effective and invisible traps in dark psychology, because it doesn't take away your freedom. It makes you believe you still have it. This tactic has been used throughout history, in politics, education, relationships, and sales. From a distance, it looks like empowerment, but up close, it's coercion wearing a smile. Authoritarian governments often do this with elections. One-party states will hold votes, but only offer pre-approved candidates. You get a ballot, you get to participate, but the outcome is already secured. It feels democratic, but it's rigged. In manipulative relationships, it sounds like this. Fine, stay out late if you really want, just don't expect me to be here when you get back. On paper, that's a choice. In reality, it's a setup. You can do what you want, but the emotional punishment is waiting. Marketers love this trap. You're told to build your own bundle or choose your plan. But the fine print reveals every option feeds the same system, tiered to guide you into a predictable, profitable outcome. You think you're in control, but your path was engineered. Here's how manipulators set it up. First, they define the frame. You don't get to decide what is being chosen, only how. Instead of asking if something is right for you, you're picking between two preset flavors of the same compromise. Next, they present the illusion. 2, maybe 3 options. 1 is clearly bad. 1 looks slightly better. And the third, that's the one they wanted you to take all along. And you'll take it, because compared to the others, it feels like your smartest move. And finally, they step back, let you decide, let you own it. So when it goes wrong, and it will, you won't blame them, you'll blame yourself. That's the dark genius of this technique. You walk into the trap voluntarily and thank them for letting you choose, because the chains feel lighter when you pick the color. Framing effect. You're told the glass is half full, you feel hopeful. You're told the same glass is half empty, you feel uneasy. Nothing changed but the frame. This is the framing effect, a manipulation tactic that shapes your judgment by changing how information is presented. The facts remain constant, but how they're delivered changes how you feel, and that feeling rewrites how you think. The term comes from behavioral economics, made famous by Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. In his research, he found that people make completely different decisions depending on whether an outcome is framed as a gain or a loss, even if the outcome is identical. And manipulators have been using that weakness ever since. A politician doesn't say, "We increased taxes." They say, "We protected essential services." A corporation doesn't say, "We laid off 5,000 employees." They say, "We're streamlining for future growth." The action doesn't change, just the language. But the effect, massive. Here's how dark manipulators use it. First, they choose the emotion they want to control: fear, pride, shame, comfort. Then they wrap the facts inside that feeling. If they want you to submit, they'll frame obedience as safety. If they want you to fight, they'll frame resistance as identity. And once the emotion is tied to the message, the facts stop mattering. In abusive relationships, it sounds like this: "I'm not controlling you. I'm just trying to protect you. I didn't yell. I just care a lot. You're not being punished. You're being taught." Each time, the same behavior is reframed to sound noble, reasonable, even loving. And that's what keeps you stuck. This tactic thrives in media, too. A protest is framed as a riot. A scandal is framed as a miscommunication. The language changes your moral response, and the manipulator walks away clean, because they never lied. They just rewrote the context. And here's the darkest part. Once the frame is accepted, your brain filters everything through it. The manipulator doesn't need to keep spinning. You'll do it for them. They twist one truth, you start twisting the rest. That's the trap. They don't change reality, they just hand you a lens. And once you're looking through it, you'll see exactly what they want you to see. Isolation strategy. It doesn't start with chains. It starts with small suggestions. "I don't think your friends really support you. Your family doesn't get what we have. They're just jealous. They're trying to come between us." At first, it sounds protective, caring, even intimate, but it's not. It's the beginning of isolation, and once this trap is set, everything else gets easier. The isolation strategy is one of the oldest techniques in psychological manipulation, used by cults, abusers, totalitarian regimes, and high-control groups throughout history. Because it's simple: if they can cut you off from anyone who challenges the control, they don't have to fight your resistance, they erase it. It begins slowly. First, they discredit your support system. "She's always negative. He doesn't respect you. Why do you let them treat you that way?" You start to doubt the people who've known you for years, because the manipulator is framing it as loyalty. You think they're defending you, but really, they're dividing you. Next, they reward your distance. If you cancel plans, if you stop calling your mom, if you drop old friendships, they praise you. "See how peaceful things are now. It's just you and me." You're finally thinking for yourself. But you're not thinking for yourself. You're thinking in a vacuum, and that's exactly what they need. Once the outside world is silent, the only voice left is theirs. They become your reality, your comfort, your authority, your source of truth. And you become smaller, more dependent, easier to shape, easier to keep. This tactic is used in abusive relationships, where one partner slowly cuts off the other's access to money, friends, and family. In cults, where new members are told to abandon toxic outsiders. In authoritarian states, where dissenters are isolated, erased, disappeared. And here's what makes it so dark. You think you made the decision. You think you drifted away. But every inch of distance was orchestrated. And once you're fully isolated, there's no one left to say, "This isn't right." There's no mirror to show you who you used to be. No hand to pull you back. No witness to the damage. Just the manipulator and the silence they created. That's the strategy, not to imprison your body, but to bury your voice until only theirs remains. The sunk cost trap. A woman stays in a loveless marriage telling herself, "We've already come this far." A man stays in a job that drains him, whispering, I've worked too hard to quit now. They're both miserable, but they keep going. Because stopping would mean admitting it was all for nothing. That's the sunk cost trap. It's the irrational commitment to a bad decision simply because you've already invested time, money, or emotion into it. The more you give, the harder it becomes to walk away, even when staying is killing you. The concept comes from economics. A sunk cost is a cost that's already spent and can't be recovered. Rationally, it shouldn't affect your future choices, but psychologically, it controls everything. Manipulators know this. At first, they just need you to start. A relationship, a job, a project, a belief system. It doesn't matter. They know that once you invest your energy, your vulnerability, your time, the trap begins to tighten. They encourage commitment early. Let's move in. You're part of the family now. We can't stop now. Look how far we've come. Every new milestone deepens your attachment, not because things are getting better, but because now you have something to lose. When the abuse starts, the dysfunction, the exhaustion, you hesitate, but you've already sacrificed so much. You don't want it to be for nothing. You tell yourself, maybe I can fix it. Maybe it's just a rough patch. You don't realize you're not protecting your future. You're protecting your past. Cult leaders use this trap with terrifying precision. The further members go, the more extreme the sacrifices become, cutting off family, donating money, surrendering freedom. And the more they give, the less likely they are to walk away. Because leaving means facing the truth. They gave their life to a lie. Toxic partners use it too. After everything I've done for you, they say, making your guilt stronger than your suffering. So you stay, you keep trying. You keep bleeding for something that should have been buried long ago. That's the darkness of the sunk cost trap. It doesn't chain your body, it enslaves your hope, and you'll keep crawling through hell, just to convince yourself it wasn't a waste. The bait and switch. You apply for a job that promises growth, freedom, and creativity. You walk in on day one and realize you've signed up for micromanagement, burnout, and silence. What happened to the dream? That's the bait and switch. It's when someone offers you something appealing, love, success, safety, opportunity, and once you commit, they swap it out for something else, something darker, something you never would have agreed to if they'd shown it up front. The name comes from classic consumer scams. A store advertises an incredible deal, a TV for $199. You rush in. Oh, they say, that model's sold out, but we have this one for $599. That's the bait. Draw you in with one thing, then switch it out when you're already there, emotionally invested and desperate not to leave empty-handed. Manipulators use this tactic constantly, not just with products, but with people. They start by giving you everything you want. Affection, freedom, recognition. They mirror your values. They promise support. It's not real. It's a hook. The moment you attach, things change. The warmth disappears. The affection becomes criticism. The freedom becomes rules. But you're already inside, already entangled in toxic relationships. It sounds like, I love how independent you are. Later, why do you need to go out so much? I admire how strong you are. Later, why are you so cold all the time? The person you fell for, that was the bait. The person you're left with, that's the switch. Cults do it on a larger scale. They offer spiritual growth, healing, belonging. New members are showered with love, and once the bond is formed, the rules tighten. The expectations increase. The consequences appear. You didn't join a prison, but now you're living in one. The switch doesn't happen all at once. That would scare you. It comes slowly, in phases disguised as compromise. And by the time you notice what's missing, the version of you who wanted to leave is already buried under guilt, confusion, and hope that the bait might come back. But it won't. It was never real. It was just the mask they wore, long enough for you to hand over your freedom. Because the most effective traps don't start as cages, they start as invitations. Silent treatment. Two friends argue. One wants to talk, the other vanishes. No reply, no eye contact, no explanation, just silence. And suddenly, the argument isn't about what happened, it's about the silence itself. This is the silent treatment, a form of emotional punishment that doesn't look like violence, but cuts just as deep. It's a tactic rooted in power. The manipulator withdraws communication, affection, attention, not to calm down, but to control. The message is clear. Until you submit, I don't exist, and neither do you. At first, it feels like distance. Then it feels like punishment. And then it feels like abandonment. The brain is wired for connection. When someone close to us goes silent, it triggers the same pain centers as physical injury. That's why the silent treatment doesn't just hurt, it destabilizes. You start replaying everything you said. You apologize for things you didn't do. You beg just to break the silence. That's the trap. Toxic partners use it to train obedience. They withdraw warmth, disappear for hours or days, then return without apology. When you ask what happened, they act confused, or worse, blame you for being too sensitive. Over time, you learn to walk on eggshells. You avoid conflict. You silence yourself, just to keep them from going silent again. Parents sometimes use it on children. The child misbehaves, and the parent gives them the cold shoulder for days. No words, no comfort, no explanation. The child learns that love is conditional, and silence is punishment. In workplaces, it's weaponized socially. A colleague is excluded from meetings, left out of emails, frozen out of conversations. No one criticizes them directly. They just erase them. The silence becomes a slow, calculated exile. What makes this tactic so dark is that it's invisible. There are no cruel words to quote, no insults to point to, just a void. One that makes you question your worth, your voice, your place in the world. And when the silence finally breaks, you don't feel relief, you feel shame. Because now you're grateful for something that should have never been withheld. That's not resolution, that's control. Pavlovian conditioning. They don't tell you what to feel, they teach you. Through repetition, through timing, through carefully controlled rewards and punishments, until your body responds before your brain even catches up. This is Pavlovian conditioning, named after Ivan Pavlov, the Russian physiologist who in the early 1900s made dogs salivate at the sound of a bell. The trick, he rang the bell right before feeding them. Over time, the dogs began to salivate at the sound alone, food or not. Their instincts had been rewired. Humans aren't any different. Dark manipulators use this principle to shape your behavior, not by convincing you, but by associating certain feelings with certain actions. Over and over again. At first, it's subtle. You speak your mind, and they withdraw affection. You pull away, and suddenly they're warm, loving, generous. You cry, they call you dramatic. You forgive, they praise your maturity. Eventually, your nervous system starts to respond before you think. You avoid speaking up, not because you decided to who, but because your body learned to fear what happens after. You give in quickly, not because you agree, but because you crave the momentary peace that follows. They've conditioned you. This tactic is common in emotionally abusive relationships. A partner will alternate between kindness and cruelty until you're addicted to their approval. The love feels euphoric, but only because the absence hurts so much. They don't have to explain their actions. They just keep training your reactions. It happens in cults, too. New members are bombarded with love, praise, and validation, only when they conform. The moment they question anything, the affection stops, then the cycle begins again. Obedience equals reward, doubt equals punishment. And it works in public systems as well. Governments and institutions may reward silence, punish dissent, and slowly condition an entire population to associate safety with submission. This isn't persuasion, it's programming. And once it's done, they don't need to manipulate you anymore. You'll flinch on your own. You'll comply without a word. And worst of all, you'll call it your choice. Because you don't realize you're reacting to a bell someone else spent months teaching you to fear. The fear of missing out, FOMO. You're scrolling. Everyone else is smiling, thriving, winning. They're on vacation. They're getting promoted. They're in love. And you're just sitting there, watching, comparing, doubting. That feeling? That spike of anxiety? That's FOMO, the fear of missing out. And it's one of the easiest, most passive forms of manipulation ever created. FOMO isn't new, but the system we live in now weaponized it. Psychologists first named the phenomenon in the early 2000s, but its roots go far deeper. Human beings are tribal. They say being excluded meant death. Acceptance meant survival. So we're wired to fear being left out, socially, romantically, professionally. That fear is ancient. Manipulators just updated the delivery system. In digital spaces, this trap is relentless. Social media doesn't show you truth. It shows you curated illusion, highlight reels, perfect timing, calculated success. And because you're only seeing the peaks of others' lives, never the valleys, you start to feel behind, less, late. And that's when the control sets in. Marketers thrive on it. Only 1 hour left. Everyone's buying this. Don't be the last to get in. It's not about the product. It's about that feeling in your chest, that tiny panic that says, what if I miss something? What if everyone else gets it, and I don't? Cult recruiters use it too. We're on the brink of a breakthrough. Don't miss your chance to ascend. Toxic partners. Same game. You'll never find this kind of love again. You think people like me are easy to find. It's never about reality. It's about your fear of exclusion and their promise that they can rescue you from it. And once you buy in, you're hooked. You stay connected. You overcommit. You say yes, not because something is right, but because you're scared of being the only one who said no. That's the dark side of FOMO. It doesn't make you want something. It makes you terrified of not having it. And in that panic, you surrender time, money, peace, just to feel like you're not falling behind. Even if you don't know what you're chasing, even if there's nothing there at all. Because the manipulator doesn't need to offer you anything real. They just have to make you afraid that everyone else already got it. Illusion of truth. Say something once, and people question it. Say it 10 times, and they start listening. Say it 100 times, and they believe it. This is the illusion of truth. A psychological glitch known as the illusory truth effect. When something is repeated often enough, the brain starts to process it as familiar, and what feels familiar starts to feel true. It doesn't matter if it's a lie. It doesn't matter if it's outrageous. What matters is that you've heard it before. This phenomenon was first studied in the 1970s by researchers who found that people were more likely to believe false statements if they had been exposed to them earlier, even once. It wasn't logic. It was comfort. Familiarity made the false feel safe. Manipulators use this constantly. They plant the lie, and then they repeat it, in different ways, through different voices, across different platforms, and slowly, the lie becomes background noise. Then, common knowledge. Then, culture. Propaganda machines run on this. Enemy nations are a threat. Our leader never lies. We are under attack. The facts don't matter. The source doesn't matter. Just repetition, over and over, until resistance wears down. In toxic relationships, the same trick applies. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. You always mess things up. You hear it once, you push back. But by the 100th time, you stop arguing. You start repeating it in your own head. Now the voice in your mind isn't even theirs, it's yours. Repetition is also used in cults. Slogans, chants, affirmations. Members repeat the doctrine until it becomes muscle memory, until it feels holy, until they no longer question what they're saying, only whether they're saying it with enough faith. And the darkest part, once the lie becomes truth, you'll defend it, spread it, live by it. Because repetition didn't just bypass your logic, it replaced it. That's why manipulators don't need to be clever. They just need to be consistent. Because the brain isn't built to fact-check everything. It's built to conserve energy, and repeating a lie is easier than thinking your way out of it. The blame shift. They lie, but it's your fault for being too suspicious. They lash out, but it's because you pushed them. They forget, but it's you who should have reminded them. This is the blame shift, a psychological tactic used to dodge accountability and dump guilt on the nearest target. Most often, that target is the person who cares the most. It starts when something goes wrong, a mistake, a conflict, a moment of cruelty. You bring it up, you ask a simple question, you express how it made you feel. But instead of taking responsibility, they pivot, they deflect. Suddenly, you're the one on trial. You're always so negative. Why do you keep bringing up the past? If you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have reacted this way. Now the conversation isn't about their behavior. It's about your tone, your timing, your supposed failures. You came looking for clarity, but now you're apologizing for creating drama. That's the trap. Blame shifting works because it confuses your internal compass. You start to second guess your own judgment. You review every interaction obsessively, looking for how you messed it up. Over time, you absorb guilt that doesn't belong to you, and that's exactly what they want. Toxic partners use this trick to maintain control. Anytime you set a boundary or express pain, they twist the narrative. You become too much, too sensitive, too needy, and they walk away clean, unbothered, untouched. Narcissistic leaders use it in workplaces. Projects fail. It's the team's fault. The company suffers. It's because others didn't deliver. They take credit when things go right and disappear when they go wrong. Even political figures rely on this. They provoke, incite, destabilize, and then blame the media, the people, the system when consequences arrive. They position themselves as victims, even when the damage is clearly theirs. And the darkest part, if you hear it long enough, you'll start blaming yourself preemptively. You'll shrink before they criticize, apologize before they accuse. You'll take on the weight of both sides, your mistakes and theirs, just to avoid the explosion. That's not accountability. That's emotional theft, because the blame shift isn't just about escaping guilt. It's about making you carry it until you're too tired to question who it belonged to in the first place. The rescuer complex. They show up when you're at your lowest. They listen, support, maybe even fix things you couldn't. You start to feel safe, maybe even grateful. But soon, that help feels heavy, conditional, controlling. You've been rescued, but now you owe them everything. This is the rescuer complex, and when used by manipulators, it's not about kindness. It's about control, disguised as compassion.
Here's how it works.
First, they look for vulnerability, emotional chaos, financial instability, a recent failure, or trauma. They offer help before you even ask. Not because they care, but because they know that people in pain will cling to anyone who shows up with a solution. Next, they create dependency. Instead of empowering you, they start doing everything for you. They offer advice, unsolicited. They insist you let them handle it. Slowly, your confidence weakens. You stop solving your own problems. You start checking with them before making decisions. And then it shifts. Their help becomes selective, strategic. They withdraw it to punish, dangle it to reward. Now you're not just surviving, you're performing, trying to stay in their good graces. You feel like you can't function without them. And that's exactly how they want it. This happens in relationships, where one partner constantly plays the hero. Where would you be without me? You'd fall apart if I left. It's not love. It's a reminder that your survival is theirs to grant. In toxic families, a parent might save a child from every mistake, then use that history to control their adult life. In cults, it's institutional. The leader creates the wound, isolation, fear, confusion, then offers themselves as the only cure. And here's the darkest part. You start confusing control for care. You believe dependence is love. You stop trusting yourself and start trusting the person who benefits from your weakness. They don't want you to grow. They want you grateful, because gratitude creates guilt, and guilt keeps you in line. They'll never say it out loud, but the message is always the same. I saved you. Now you belong to me. Rewriting the narrative. You remember them yelling. They say they were just passionate. You remember being betrayed. They say you misunderstood. You remember trying to leave. They say they were the one who walked away. This is rewriting the narrative, a tactic where the manipulator doesn't erase the past. They distort it until you doubt your version of it. The facts don't change, but your interpretation. That's what they're after. And it works. Because memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time we recall something, we reshape it slightly, based on new emotions, influences, or social pressure. Psychologists call this the reconsolidation effect. That's what manipulators exploit. Here's how it works. First, they inject doubt. Right after the event, they shift your emotional framing. It wasn't that bad. You're exaggerating. You took it the wrong way. You hesitate, because doubt is contagious. And they say it with such certainty, such calm, that it must be you. Then, they repeat their version. Over and over. Confident, unwavering. I never raised my voice. You were the one who started it. I only reacted because you pushed me. Over time, your mind starts to pull those rewritten lines into the memory itself. You begin to picture it differently, feel it differently. It's not logic, it's emotional retelling. Cognitive dissonance plays a role here. You don't want to believe you're with someone harmful, so your brain adjusts the memory to protect your current reality. If the relationship is still intact, your mind will edit history to make that truth feel safer. It happens in abusive relationships, in gaslighting parents, in cult deprogramming recovery. Survivors often say, I thought it was my fault for years. I remembered it all wrong, but the memory wasn't wrong. It was reframed under pressure. The most insidious part, they do it slowly, casually, with charm. They don't need to be right. They just need you to feel uncertain. And once they've shifted your perception, they shift your identity. You're not someone who was hurt. You're someone who misread the situation. You're not someone who stood up. You're someone who overreacted, because they didn't just rewrite the story, they rewrote your role in it. The confusion technique. You're in a conversation, but something's wrong. Their words contradict each other. They shift topics mid-sentence. They say one thing, then deny it minutes later. You try to follow, but the more you listen, the less you understand. And somehow, by the end of it, you're the one apologizing. This is the confusion technique, a deliberate method of psychological destabilization, where the manipulator overwhelms you with contradictions, unpredictability, or mental noise until you stop thinking clearly and start complying instinctively. It was first studied in interrogation tactics. Hypnosis pioneer Milton Erickson and later military psychologists discovered that when subjects are bombarded with contradictory language, their mental defenses weaken, their analytical mind shuts down. They become more suggestible, easier to control. Manipulators use this principle in everyday life, not to interrogate, but to control narratives, rewrite truth, and disarm resistance. Here's how it works. They start with unpredictability. They contradict themselves constantly. They tell you one story on Monday, then deny it on Friday. They say, I love you, then vanish for days. When you ask for clarity, they twist it. I never said that. You're misremembering. You're too emotional. That's step one. Break your confidence in your perception. Next, they overload your mind with distractions. They bring up unrelated topics, create new problems before the last one is resolved. Every conversation becomes a maze. You try to get answers, but end up defending yourself against things you didn't even do. Now your brain is exhausted. You can't trust your memory. You don't know what's true. You just want it to stop. That's when they offer relief. Just listen to me. Let me explain how it really is. And you give in, not because you believe them, but because your mind is too fogged to fight back. This is how cults, authoritarian regimes, and abusers maintain power. They overwhelm with contradictory rules, redefine right and wrong daily, change the goalposts until resistance feels impossible. And the darkest part, the longer you live inside confusion, the more you start to need them to feel stable. You don't trust your memory. You don't trust your logic, so you trust them. They created the chaos, and now they're the only one who seems calm inside it. That's not clarity, that's domination. False hope loop. They hurt you, then say they're working on themselves. They disappear, then whisper, I just need time. They betray you, then promise, things will be different. And just like that, you stay. Not for what they've done, but for what they say they'll do. This is the false hope trap, a tactic that keeps you loyal, patient, and suffering, all because you believe that maybe the story will turn around. That hope, even fake hope, is enough to hold you hostage. Here's how it works. It starts with damage. They do something that should end the relationship, the deal, the dynamic, something that crosses a line. But instead of denying it, they acknowledge just enough, not full accountability, just a sprinkle.
I know I've been distant. I know I messed up.
It sounds like growth, but it's not. That's the hook. Next comes the promise. I'm changing. I just need you to hang in there. This time will be different. You hear exactly what you need to hear, and your brain, desperate for resolution, clings to it. Psychologists call this temporal discounting, the tendency to value future rewards more than present pain. It's a glitch in our emotional logic. We endure now because we believe something better is coming. Manipulators know this. They don't need to deliver. They just need to delay, postpone, buy time, and you keep extending the deadline. In abusive relationships, it's textbook. They scream, then cry. They hit, then apologize. They sabotage, then beg. The cycle continues, because every time you're about to leave, they dangle a version of themselves they never intend to become. In cults and toxic workplaces, it's institutional. We're evolving. The breakthrough is close. We're almost there. Don't give up now. Members tolerate suffering because they believe the payoff is just around the corner. It never is. And here's the darkest part. The longer you stay for the promise, the more invested you become in defending it. Because if you admit it was a lie, then you have to face everything you gave up waiting for it. So you wait a little longer. You lower your expectations. You reframe the abuse as growth. You convince yourself it's working, but they're not changing. They never were. They just know how powerful hope is, especially when it's false. Token gestures. You and a friend are watching someone slowly fall apart. They keep saying things aren't that bad, that sometimes it's good. They're clinging to scraps. One kind word, one apology, one decent day, and you see it clearly. They're not being loved, they're being managed. That's token gestures, when a manipulator offers tiny moments of decency, just enough to interrupt your doubt, reset your anger, and keep you in place. Not to repair the relationship, but to maintain control. This isn't kindness, it's a strategy. What makes this tactic so effective is its timing. The manipulator watches for the moment you're close to breaking. When you're ready to walk, when you're starting to pull away, that's when the gesture comes. A gift, a compliment, a small act of unexpected tenderness. It disorients you, makes you question your judgment. You think, maybe things are changing, but they're not. That moment wasn't growth, it was bait. Psychologically, it preys on intermittent reinforcement, the same principle behind gambling addiction. You don't win often, but you win just enough to keep pulling the lever. Token gestures work the same way. The love isn't consistent, the respect isn't real, but when it shows up, even for a second, your brain releases just enough dopamine to keep hoping. In abusive dynamics, this becomes a loop. After days of neglect, they say something kind. After weeks of criticism, they hold your hand. After threats and emotional withdrawal, they suddenly want to talk things out. And it works, not because it's enough, but because your standards have been lowered without you noticing. This also happens in toxic workplaces. A boss who rarely acknowledges your effort gives you a random compliment right before asking for unpaid overtime. Or a company gives you a pizza party after a month of burnout and calls it team appreciation. And the more you accept these gestures as evidence of care, the harder it becomes to see the pattern. You start defending the few good moments while ignoring the constant damage. But one flower doesn't fix a field of rot. One smile doesn't erase months of control. That's the darkness of token gestures. They don't change anything. They just keep you hoping something might. Reverse victimhood. Imagine someone pushes you hard. You stumble, you speak up, and suddenly they're in tears. They're the one shaking. They say, "You misunderstood, you overreacted, you hurt them by calling it out." Now you're not defending yourself anymore, you're defending against them. This is reverse victimhood, when the manipulator flips the emotional dynamic and paints themselves as the one who's been wronged. It doesn't matter what actually happened. What matters is how convincingly they can perform pain. It's a powerful form of emotional misdirection. You come in with clarity, a complaint, a boundary, a confrontation, but within minutes, you're off balance. They've redirected the spotlight, and now you're explaining, soothing, apologizing. The roles have reversed, but not because of truth, because of strategy. Why does it work so well? Because humans are wired to respond to visible suffering. When someone cries, trembles, or acts hurt, our defenses drop, empathy kicks in, and manipulators know that. That's why this tactic is used at the moment. Accountability is closest. It's a shield, a way to avoid responsibility without saying a word. This is common in abusive relationships. You bring up something hurtful, and suddenly they're accusing you of being cruel. Habol, I can't believe you'd say that to me. I try so hard, and you just attack me. The actual harm they caused vanishes, replaced by a new emotional emergency, their feelings. It happens in toxic families. A parent berates a child, then cries. When the child sets a boundary, it's after everything I've done for you. The child ends up comforting the very person who caused the pain, and it happens publicly, especially when those in power are called out. A CEO accused of misconduct frames themselves as a victim of cancel culture. A leader exposed for abuse claims they're being unfairly targeted. It's not defense, it's inversion. Control by playing the wounded. The psychological mechanism at play here is emotional hijacking. The listener's attention is pulled away from the facts and locked onto the display of pain. Logic fades, guilt rises, and the manipulator walks away, not just untouched, but comforted. That's the brilliance and the cruelty of reverse victimhood. It doesn't stop the truth, it just drowns it, in tears, in silence, in a carefully staged performance that leaves only one story behind, theirs. Manufactured chaos. You and a friend are trying to talk through something simple, a plan, a boundary, a problem to solve. But the moment you begin, the situation explodes. Voices rise, old wounds surface. Nothing stays on topic. Everything becomes dramatic, exhausting, urgent, and then it hits you. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is on purpose. Manufactured chaos is a manipulation tactic where the abuser keeps your environment, emotional, mental, even physical, in a constant state of disorder. The goal isn't clarity, it's distraction. Because when everything is falling apart, you don't have the bandwidth to question why. At the core of this technique is a psychological principle called cognitive overload. A human brains can only process so much at once. When overwhelmed, we default to survival behavior. Stop thinking deeply, stop resisting, follow whatever seems like the fastest path to relief. The manipulator thrives in that fog. They trigger this chaos in cycles. First, they destabilize your emotional baseline. One day, they're warm. The next, they're cold. Plans change without notice. Promises are broken. Conversations become fights. You try to make sense of it, but the rules keep shifting. Then, they inject urgency. They create fake emergencies, exaggerate threats, pit people against each other. You're constantly putting out fires, apologizing, mediating, fixing what they quietly broke. Finally, they present themselves as the calm in the storm. Why are you always so emotional? I'm the only one who gets things done. They start the chaos, then pose as the solution. And now, you're not just confused, you're dependent. This shows up in abusive households. The atmosphere is tense, unpredictable. The children learn to tiptoe, appease, stay silent. They never know what will trigger the next outburst, so they stay anxious, distracted, powerless. It happens in cults and high-control groups. Constant crises, spiritual emergencies, invented threats. The leader always has the answer, but the chaos never ends. That's the point. It happens in politics, manufactured fear, misdirection, scandals, stacked on scandals. While the public fights over the noise, the real agenda moves forward, unnoticed. And here's the darkest part. The more chaos you endure, the more normal it feels. Eventually, calm feels suspicious. Peace feels temporary. You begin bracing for impact, even when nothing's wrong. That's not just exhaustion, that's conditioning. And the longer they keep you spinning, the less likely you are to realize you're not trying to solve a problem, you're trying to survive a design. Emotional debt. You're given a gift you didn't ask for. They go out of their way to help. They sacrifice something. Time, money, attention, just for you. It feels generous, unexpected, almost too much. And later, when you hesitate to give something back, even something small, they remind you, after everything I've done for you. This is emotional debt, a form of control where gestures, favors, or affection aren't given freely, but as investments, not in love, not in trust, but in future leverage. The key is that you were never told it was a transaction. You never agreed to the terms. But now you're caught in a silent contract, one they wrote, and you're expected to honor. It works because of reciprocity bias, one of the most universal human impulses. Psychologists have found that even unrequested favors make people feel obligated. The manipulator knows this. That's why they give you things you didn't ask for. And often, when you're most vulnerable, they might support you when no one else does. Step in when you're at your worst. Offer gifts, cover your expenses, show up in grand ways. And for a while, you feel safe, grateful, even lucky. But it doesn't last. Soon, the favors turn into quiet expectations. You're expected to stay silent when they cross a line. You're expected to agree when you want to say no. You're expected to be loyal, not because of love, but because of what you owe. And if you refuse, if you pull away, the generosity gets weaponized. You're ungrateful. You wouldn't be here without me. No one else would have done what I did. This tactic appears in toxic relationships, where one partner pays for everything, then uses it to control behavior. In families, where a parent sacrifices endlessly, but guilt trips the child for ever choosing independence. Even in friendships or workplaces, where help becomes a chain. What makes this tactic so suffocating is that it's framed as love. You're not being blackmailed, you're being reminded. You're not being manipulated, you're being told what's fair. But love doesn't keep score. And kindness that demands payment was never kindness at all. You didn't ask for the debt, you never signed the deal. But they'll still make sure you pay. Smokescreen tactics. You confront them calmly, one issue, one question. But within seconds, the subject shifts. Now they're talking about something you said 3 months ago. Now they're accusing you of being controlling. Now they're bringing up your flaws, your tone, your past. And somehow you've gone from holding them accountable to defending your character. This is the smokescreen, a tactic built not to answer, but to obscure. The manipulator floods the conversation with irrelevant details, new accusations, emotional triggers, anything to make sure the original issue disappears in the haze. It's not random. It's engineered. The moment you begin to make a point that might corner them, they deploy cognitive diversion, redirecting your mental energy away from clarity and into chaos. It's often paired with whataboutism, a classic propaganda tactic. What about when you did this? Why are you upset about this when that happened? And it works, because our brains aren't built to track multiple emotional threads at once. In high-stress exchanges, we default to the most immediate threat, not the most important one. So you start chasing the smoke. You try to correct every distortion. You defend things that weren't even on the table. You're trying to prove you're not the problem, while the actual problem slinks into the background, untouched. This happens in toxic relationships, especially with narcissists. You try to bring up one specific hurt, and suddenly they're flooding the moment with everything you've ever done wrong. You feel overwhelmed, defensive, ashamed, and they walk away without ever taking responsibility. It shows up in workplace manipulation too. You raise a concern about unfair treatment, and leadership responds with bureaucratic fog, policies, red tape, vague references to team dynamics, until your valid point is drowned in administrative noise. Even authoritarian regimes use it. Whenever a scandal arises, they stir up cultural panic, invent a crisis, or shift the national conversation entirely. The public becomes too distracted to pursue justice, and the issue quietly fades. This is the trap. You think you're arguing. You think you're getting closer to resolution. But in reality, you're just wandering deeper into the fog, and while you're lost in it, they disappear with the truth. Withholding. They don't scream. They don't slam doors. They just stop showing up. No more affection. No more answers. No more acknowledgement of your needs. Emotional, physical, or even basic human connection. You reach out. They pull back. You ask a question. They change the subject. You share a feeling. They go quiet. This is withholding, a covert form of manipulation where the abuser doesn't exert force. They remove care. They weaponize absence, and the damage runs deep. What makes this tactic so devastating is its invisibility. It's hard to explain what's happening. They didn't say anything cruel. They're just tired. Maybe I'm asking for too much. You begin questioning your own expectations, not their behavior. At a psychological level, withholding exploits your attachment system. According to attachment theory, humans are wired to seek emotional connection from those they're bonded to. When that connection is unpredictably removed, the result is anxiety and eventually emotional dysregulation. In early stages, this looks like subtle coldness, delayed replies, lack of interest in your day, avoiding eye contact. The absence is just enough to make you feel off balance, but not enough to justify a confrontation. Then it escalates. They stop saying, "I love you." They stop touching you. They stop offering support, unless it benefits them. And when you finally bring it up, they minimize it. You're too needy. Or they flip it. You've been distant lately. You're starved, and then blamed for feeling hungry. This shows up in romantic relationships where one partner controls the emotional flow, giving just enough to keep the other hooked, then pulling it away to punish or dominate. It happens in parental dynamics too, where love is conditional on obedience, and silence becomes the default response to disappointment. And in workplaces, it's used to freeze people out, excluding you from meetings, withholding information, offering no feedback, no direction, no growth, until you feel invisible. The cruelty of withholding isn't what's done to you, it's what's denied. Because it's not rejection you fear, it's the silence, the absence, the growing sense that nothing you do matters anymore. And eventually, you stop asking, stop needing, stop reaching out, not because you're healed, but because you've learned there's nothing left to reach for. Deliberate inconsistency. Some days, they love you fiercely. Other days, they ignore you. Cold, detached. They'll praise you in public, then criticize you in private. They'll promise the world, then vanish. And you never know who's going to walk through the door. So you wait, you adjust, you walk on eggshells. This is deliberate inconsistency, a manipulation tactic where a person behaves unpredictably on purpose, keeping you in a constant state of emotional uncertainty. You're not just responding to them, you're monitoring them, trying to read their mood before they even speak. It's not poor communication, it's not mood swings, it's psychological destabilization, and it's effective. The core mechanism behind this is known as behavioral unpredictability conditioning, rooted in studies from behavioral psychology and even animal training. In the 1950s, experiments with rats showed that random rewards created more compulsive behavior than consistent ones. Later, B.F. Skinner extended this to variable ratio reinforcement, the same principle slot machines use. The less predictable the reward, the more the subject chases it. Manipulators apply this to your emotions. You're praised after doing nothing, then punished after doing everything right. You're told everything's fine, then blamed for missing signals you were never given. You get affection, then silence, support, then sabotage. So you try harder, you study them, you mirror their energy, You blame yourself when things go wrong, not because you're guilty, but because you're desperate to regain stability. And that's the trap. You're not focused on what they're doing anymore. You're too busy managing your own reactions. This shows up in romantic relationships, where one partner shifts between idealization and devaluation, a pattern consistent with narcissistic abuse and trauma bonding. It appears in parenting. A child raised with inconsistent discipline learns to internalize fear and guilt even when they haven't done anything wrong. And it's built into authoritarian systems, rules that shift daily, where loyalty is rewarded one day, punished the next. The people stop resisting because they never know which version of the authority they'll be punished by. This isn't just destabilizing, it's rewiring. Over time, your nervous system gets trapped in a state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for emotional danger, unable to rest. This leads to chronic anxiety, memory issues, and eventually learned helplessness. You stop reacting, you stop resisting, you just survive. That's the power of deliberate inconsistency, not because it destroys you all at once, but because it makes sure you never feel safe long enough to realize you're being destroyed at all. Pathologizing emotion. You cry. They say you're unstable. You get angry. They call you abusive. You set a boundary. They accuse you of being dramatic. It doesn't matter how calmly you speak or how valid your pain is. The moment you express emotion, it becomes the reason you're wrong. This is pathologizing emotion, a manipulation tactic, where natural human responses are redefined as symptoms of dysfunction, not to understand you, but to discredit you. At first, it feels like miscommunication. You explain yourself, hoping they'll understand, but they don't engage with your point. They analyze your tone. You're too emotional to talk about this. You always make a big deal out of nothing. This is why people don't take you seriously. The conversation shifts from what happened to how you reacted. And now, instead of being heard, you're being diagnosed. Psychologically, this tactic works because it exploits your social conditioning. We're taught that rationality equals credibility, that being too emotional is a weakness, especially for women, marginalized groups, or anyone outside traditional power. So when someone dismisses you as irrational, it taps into a deep fear. Maybe they're right. That fear silences you. In relationships, this shows up as one partner constantly labeling the other as unstable, jealous, or sensitive. They use those labels to dodge accountability. You're not reacting to harm. You're just being paranoid. In families, a child's natural frustration is pathologized as rebellion. You need help replaces. You might have a point. In workplaces, an employee voicing burnout or unfair treatment is labeled difficult or unprofessional. Their concern is no longer valid. It's a problem to be managed. And here's where the trap tightens over time. You internalize it. You feel yourself start to filter your reactions. You apologize before speaking. You numb your anger. You suppress tears, not because you're over it, but because you've been trained to see your feelings as the problem. The pain doesn't go away, it just goes quiet. This tactic is especially powerful when paired with gaslighting. You question your reality, and you're told your emotional response is proof you're broken. Your logic erodes. Your voice fades. And eventually, the only acceptable version of you is the one that feels nothing at all. That's the danger. They don't just silence your words. They make you ashamed of your feelings. And once you start hiding those from yourself, they don't need to control you anymore. You'll do it for them. Identity attachment. One of the most effective forms of control isn't taking away your choices. It's taking away your sense of self. The more attached you are to someone, emotionally, psychologically, even ideologically, the more likely you are to bend, conform, and surrender your own identity in order to maintain the connection. That's how identity attachment works. It's not about compliance. It's about fusion. They don't want you to obey them. They want you to become an extension of them. It often starts with intensity, not pressure. They say, "You're everything I've ever wanted. No one gets me like you do. We're exactly the same." At first, It sounds like love, like deep compatibility. But what they're actually doing is creating dependency. You begin to measure your worth through their attention. You feel seen, chosen, important, but only when you're in alignment with them. Then the shaping begins. They give subtle feedback, masked as care. You don't really like that show, do you? You'd look better if you wore something else.
I'm just trying to help you grow.
You start adjusting. Tiny things. Your style, your voice, your friends. You don't even notice it at first. You just want harmony. You want to keep that connection. Psychologically, this is a violation of self-concept integrity. Over time, your boundaries erode, and the definition of you becomes blurred with them. It becomes easier to go along than to resist, because resistance feels like disconnection, and disconnection feels like rejection. So you adapt. You see this tactic in manipulative relationships, where one partner becomes the emotional sun and the other orbits around them, losing pieces of themselves with every rotation. You see it in cults, where individuality is replaced by groupthink. In high-control environments, where a person's job, belief system, or loyalty becomes so central that walking away feels like losing a limb. By the time the damage is visible, it's deep. You don't just fear leaving, you fear not knowing who you are without them. Your taste, your thoughts, your values, all filtered through someone else. They've trained you to see your reflection through their eyes. And if they stop looking at you, you disappear. This isn't connection, it's possession. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to tell the difference. Manufactured jealousy. Jealousy is a natural emotion, primal, ancient, wired into the survival center of your brain. It evolved to protect connection, to sound the alarm when something precious is threatened. But manipulators don't fear that alarm. They weaponize it, not to protect the bond, but to dominate it. This is manufactured jealousy, the deliberate act of triggering jealousy in someone to create insecurity, dependency, and control. It's not accidental, it's engineered. They want you anxious, off balance, watching them constantly, wondering who's next. The game begins with subtle provocations. A glance at someone else, a casual name drop, flirty energy they never had with you, now on full display for someone new. When you question it, they dismiss you. You're imagining things. Don't be crazy. You should be more confident. That's the trap. They create the threat, then blame you for feeling it. Psychologically, this preys on attachment anxiety and your brain's built-in threat detection circuitry. The amygdala lights up. Cortisol floods your system. You enter survival mode, not to escape danger, but to win them back. You compete, you chase, you overperform, and they don't have to lift a finger. It escalates quickly. They bring up exes, compliment others in front of you, post ambiguous photos. They might even create imaginary admirers just to spark tension. Someone at work keeps flirting with me. It's annoying. They act bothered, but they're watching your reaction. And if you stay quiet, they turn it up. This tactic appears in romantic relationships, but also in toxic friendships and workplace dynamics. Managers play employees against each other for performance. Group leaders spark jealousy to test loyalty. Even influencers and cult-like communities use selective attention to keep followers begging for validation. The sick genius of it all. You never feel safe. Even when you're close, you're afraid. Because the reward, their attention, is never guaranteed. It's doled out when it benefits them most. You're not chasing love, you're chasing relief. And as long as they can stir that feeling, that knot in your stomach, that fear of losing them, they know you'll stay. You'll fight. You'll doubt yourself, not them. Because the moment you forget your value, they own you. Invalidating reality. There's no violence, no raised voice, just a subtle shake of the head, a sigh, a quiet, calm response. That's not what happened. You remember it clearly, what they said, what they did, how it made you feel, but they keep denying it, reframing it, laughing it off. And soon, you start wondering, did I get it wrong? This is invalidating reality, the psychological dismantling of someone's perception of truth. It's a tactic designed to confuse, disarm, and eventually destroy your ability to trust yourself. And once that's gone, you're not just manipulated, you're rewired. It doesn't start with lies. It starts with subtle contradictions. I never said that. That's not how it happened. You always twist things. At first, you push back. You try to prove your memory, but they're calm, unbothered, and you, emotional, frustrated, look unstable by comparison. That's by design. The psychological mechanism here taps into epistemic trust, our basic need to believe that what we perceive and remember is reliable. When that trust is attacked repeatedly, the brain defaults to external validation. You start outsourcing truth to the person who seems more confident, even if they're wrong. Over time, they deny not just facts, but feelings. You say something hurt you. They say, you're too sensitive. You say you felt ignored. They say, you're imagining it. You begin to apologize for emotions you didn't invent and suppress experiences you actually lived. This tactic is the spine of gaslighting, a term rooted in the 1944 film Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife into believing she's insane by subtly altering their environment and denying reality. But this tactic is older than cinema, used by cult leaders, abusers, interrogators, and authoritarian regimes alike. The goal is always the same: destroy your ability to think independently, and they'll never need to silence you. You'll silence yourself. It's not just personal. In the political world, it sounds like fake news that never happened. You're being paranoid. In toxic families, it sounds like we never treated you like that. You're remembering wrong. And in relationships, it sounds like you're crazy. You always make things up. And here's where the darkness fully sets in. The longer it happens, the more you disconnect from your own narrative. You hesitate to trust your feelings. You doubt your instincts. You edit your memory to match their version, not because it makes sense, but because it's safer than the constant war. Eventually, you stop asking, stop confronting, stop believing what your body knows is true. That's not confusion. That's psychological erosion. They didn't just manipulate the story. They made you forget it ever belonged to you. Loyalty traps. Loyalty is one of the oldest human instincts, an emotional tether born from survival. In ancient times, loyalty to your tribe meant protection, food, safety. To betray the group was to risk isolation, even death. Over generations, that survival instinct became sacred. Loyalty evolved into something moral, noble, even spiritual. To be loyal is to be good. To betray is to be cast out. We grow up learning to value it. Loyalty to family, loyalty to friends, loyalty to country, loyalty to ideals. It's often described as the highest virtue, a sign of character, integrity, honor, and because of that, it becomes deeply tied to identity. You don't just act loyal, you see yourself as loyal. But that's what makes it so dangerous in the wrong hands. In the realm of manipulation, loyalty becomes currency, something to be demanded, tested, weaponized. The loyalty trap is when someone doesn't earn your devotion. They expect it, they claim it, they exploit it, and if you question their behavior, suddenly you're the traitor. The trap begins with intense bonding. They make you feel chosen. You're the only one who really understands me. It's us against the world. These aren't just compliments, they're hooks. You're not just close, you're aligned, emotionally, even morally, which means if you ever pull away, it won't just hurt them, it will betray the story you've built together. From there, the manipulation deepens. They violate your boundaries. They lie, lash out, or disappear, then look you in the eye and say, "Phew, but I thought you were loyal." They reframe their abuse as a loyalty test, and your silence as proof of love. Psychologically, this exploits the consistency bias, our deep need to stay aligned with who we believe we are. If you see yourself as a loyal person, you'll bend over backward to keep proving it. Even when the relationship becomes toxic, loyalty becomes your prison. This tactic shows up everywhere. In toxic relationships where devotion is demanded but never returned. In high-control families where questioning tradition is treated as betrayal. In cults where loyalty is tested through sacrifice and submission. Even in workplaces, where team players are expected to stay quiet in the face of abuse. And as the trap tightens, the manipulator no longer needs to earn trust. They just invoke your loyalty like a weapon. After everything I've done for you, I thought you were different. You said you'd never leave. Now you're staying, not because it's right, but because it would feel wrong to walk away. This is the dark side of loyalty, when it stops being a gift and becomes a leash. When you're no longer protecting a bond, you're protecting an illusion. And every time you forgive, endure, stay silent, bend, you're not just proving loyalty, you're proving they can get away with anything. Future faking. Humans are forward-looking creatures. We don't just survive the present, we endure it by believing in the future. That's why promises are powerful. A vision of what could be is often more compelling than what is, and manipulators know it. Future faking is the tactic of selling you a dream, a perfect future, a beautiful outcome, a life you both deserve, just to keep you locked in place. They never intend to deliver. They just need you to believe, because if they can hook your hope, they don't need to control your body. You'll stay willingly. You'll wait. The manipulation often begins early. They speak of marriage on the second date. They talk about moving in together after a few weeks. They describe vacations you haven't booked, children you haven't planned, a life they haven't built, but speak of it as if it's already real. It's intoxicating. You picture it. You start adjusting your present around that imagined future. And then, nothing happens. Plans get delayed. Excuses pile up. The dream remains just out of reach, like a carrot on a string. Every time you bring it up, they give you just enough to keep you hoping. It's not the right time. I just need to get through this. You know I want this too. Be patient. And you are. Because you've already emotionally invested in a reality that doesn't exist. Psychologically, this taps into the intertemporal choice bias, the tendency to overvalue future rewards at the expense of present conditions. You tolerate neglect, dishonesty, even abuse, because you believe it's temporary. The payoff is coming. You just have to be strong. This tactic shows up in romantic manipulation, where long-term promises are used to override current behavior. In cults, where followers endure hardship because they've been promised salvation, enlightenment, or ascension. In business, where employees are promised promotions that never come, but loyalty is expected in return. The danger isn't just in the waiting. It's in what you give up while you wait: time, self-respect, emotional clarity. You begin defending them to others. You silence your doubts. You postpone your own dreams, all for a fantasy that only exists in their words. And when you finally start to see the truth, you don't just mourn the relationship, you mourn the life you thought you were building, the life they never intended to give you, the future they used as bait. They didn't just lie to you, they let you build a world in your mind, then left you to live in the ruins. Boundary testing. Boundaries are how we protect ourselves. They define what's acceptable, what's safe, what we will and won't tolerate. They are the invisible lines that keep our identity intact. But boundaries aren't destroyed with one blow. They're eroded over time, and manipulators are patient. Boundary testing is the quiet, calculated process of pushing past your limits, not to destroy them immediately, but to learn where they are, how firm they are, and how easily they can be moved. It's not always malicious at first. Sometimes it's disguised as charm. Let's just bend the rule this once. Don't be so uptight. Come on, it's not that serious. Then it escalates. They interrupt you when you speak. They make jokes at your expense. They pressure you to say yes when you want to say no. Each time you give in, even slightly, they make a mental note. That worked. Next time, I'll go further. Psychologically, this taps into compliance drift, the phenomenon where small, repeated concessions lead to larger, unintentional changes in behavior. What felt wrong at first starts to feel normal. You rationalize, you adapt. You say, it's not a big deal even when it is. And the longer it continues, the more you forget where your original boundaries even were. In relationships, this looks like tolerating disrespect, just this once. Then, again. and again, until you're tolerating manipulation, criticism, even abuse, all under the illusion of compromise. In workplaces, it begins with working late once, then every night, taking on more than your role requires, keeping quiet when ethics are crossed because it's easier that way. In cults and authoritarian environments, boundary testing becomes systematic. Small infractions lead to bigger sacrifices. Questioning becomes forbidden. Sewer, dissent is punished. And by the time the group is fully controlled, its members believe they chose the rules themselves. This is what makes boundary testing so dangerous. It feels like your idea. You think you're being flexible, kind, mature. But what's really happening is incremental surrender, inch by inch, until you're standing in a space you would have never accepted at the beginning. And when you finally push back, they call you inconsistent. They say you were fine with it before. They frame your growth as betrayal and your resistance as disloyalty. But boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They're the framework that keeps you whole. And if someone keeps testing them, step by step, they're not trying to know you better. They're trying to see what they can take. The guilt bind. Guilt is one of the strongest forces in human psychology. It evolved to keep us tethered to community, to make us correct mistakes, restore harmony, protect others. It's what stops us from lying, cheating, harming. In a healthy relationship, guilt guides conscience, but in a manipulative one, guilt becomes a cage, a tool of obedience. The guilt bind is when your natural empathy is turned against you. When someone makes you feel bad, not for doing harm, but for protecting yourself, for having needs, for saying no, for daring to walk away. It begins subtly. They hint at how much they've sacrificed. After everything I've done for you, no one else would have put up with this. You feel pressure, not because they're right, but because the accusation is emotionally loaded. You don't want to be the selfish one. You don't want to be cruel. So, you stay. Then comes emotional debt. They bring up the past, times they were there for you, things they gave, love they showed. Those things may have been real, but now they're being tallied, used as leverage. The message is clear. You owe them your silence, your patience, your continued presence. Psychologically, this trap works by exploiting internalized moral schemas, your identity as a good, kind, loyal person. The manipulator doesn't need to punish you. You'll do it yourself. You'll hold back your truth because you don't want to hurt their feelings. You'll absorb pain because you don't want to abandon them. And every time you stay silent to protect them, you betray yourself just a little more. This tactic shows up in trauma-bonded relationships, where the abuser plays the victim. You express hurt. They cry harder. You try to leave. They spiral. Now, instead of focusing on your healing, you're managing their emotions. The guilt doesn't come from wrongdoing. It comes from the threat of their suffering. It happens in families too. Parents who say, "I gave you life, and this is how you repay me." In communities and cultures that demand sacrifice in the name of tradition. In high-control groups that teach you that leaving makes you a traitor, or even a monster. And here's the cruel twist. The more empathy you have, the more likely you are to fall into this trap. The more you care, the more they use that care to trap you. Your best traits, compassion, patience, emotional responsibility, are used to keep you quiet, compliant, and ashamed of even thinking about your own needs. And if you ever try to speak the truth, they don't attack you. They make you feel like you're the attacker. But guilt shouldn't be used to erase your boundaries. It shouldn't keep you in pain. And it shouldn't be used to make you doubt your right to leave. Because when someone weaponizes guilt to keep you small, silent, or suffering, they're not asking for forgiveness. They're demanding control. Triumph shaming. Not all manipulation punishes failure. Some punishes success. Triumph shaming is the tactic of making someone feel guilty, selfish, arrogant, or disloyal for growing, for improving, for escaping, for doing better than they were expected to. It's a form of control that targets your rising self-worth and infects it with shame. The strategy is quiet, casual, but always laced with poison. Oh, so you think you're better than us now? Don't forget where you came from. Wow, must be nice. Some of us don't have that luxury. It doesn't confront your success directly. It makes you question whether you deserve it. Psychologically, this exploits a powerful vulnerability, survivor guilt, the emotional discomfort people feel when they escape something others are still trapped in. It shows up in people who escape poverty, abuse, toxic families, high control groups. You make it out. And then the voice starts, why you? Did you abandon them? Are you selfish for moving on? Manipulators use this to reverse the emotional flow. Instead of being proud of your strength, you feel disloyal for not suffering with them. They tie your success to betrayal, and they expect you to apologize for healing. Historically, you see this tactic in totalitarian regimes, especially those built around enforced equality. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, intellectuals and educated people were executed for thinking they were better. Eyeglasses, books, foreign languages, any symbol of advancement were enough to get you killed. Success was framed as arrogance. Education became treason. The goal wasn't just to kill progress, it was to make people fear it. In cults, triumph shaming happens when someone starts to question the doctrine, to grow beyond the teachings.
You've been getting proud lately.
You're starting to think you know more than the group. Soon, confidence is called ego. Critical thinking is called disobedience. In toxic families, it's used to keep you tied to dysfunction. You start setting boundaries. They say you've changed. You get therapy. They call you cold. You move forward, and they act like you've turned your back on them. They don't want your success. They want your submission. And in relationships, this sounds like, don't get too big for me. You're not as great as you think. Remember, I knew you before all this. The manipulator sees your rising self-worth as a threat. So they make you feel guilty for shining. They call it humility, but it's fear. They don't want you proud. They want you manageable. And here's the quiet tragedy. If it works, you'll start dimming your own light. You'll hide your growth, downplay your wins, sabotage your potential, just to stay acceptable, just to keep the peace. That's not modesty. That's psychological containment. And success that comes with shame is just another cage. Phantom norms. No one said you were wrong. No one had to. You just felt it, like a cold draft in a room full of closed windows. You opened your mouth to speak, and something stopped you. Not a threat, not a scream, just the quiet suspicion that if you said what you really thought, you'd be the only one. Phantom norms is the manipulation tactic of inventing a fictional majority. It convinces you that everyone else agrees, everyone else complies. No one else has a problem, even when that's a lie. The goal isn't to control you directly. It's to make you control yourself. This tactic works by hijacking your need to belong. Psychologists call it pluralistic ignorance, a phenomenon where people go along with a norm they secretly disagree with because they wrongly assume everyone else accepts it. Everyone's waiting for someone else to object. No one does. So the lie becomes law. You see it in high-control communities, where questioning leadership is labeled as extremism. You keep your doubts to yourself because no one else is doubting, or so it seems. But if you could hear their thoughts, you'd know everyone's pretending. Everyone's afraid of being the first to speak. You see it in schools, in offices, in families, in rooms where something harmful is happening, and nobody interrupts. The silence isn't approval, it's survival. But the manipulator steps into that silence and whispers, "See, it's just you." Historically, this tactic has been used to destroy truth at scale. In totalitarian regimes, leaders don't just censor opposition, they erase the sense that opposition ever existed. In Stalin's Soviet Union, millions were imprisoned or executed, and yet, most citizens believed they were alone in their fear. They whispered to no one. They looked over their shoulder. And the absence of protest created the illusion of support. In abusive families, phantom norms sound like, your siblings never had a problem with this. Everyone in this family knows how to act. You're the only one making things difficult. And suddenly, you're not just in pain. You're abnormal for noticing the pain. In relationships, it becomes, most people would be grateful. Anyone else would see how good they have it. Your boundaries become deviant. Your discomfort becomes selfishness. You don't push back, not because they convinced you, but because they convinced you no one else would agree. And here's the most disturbing part. They never had to prove the norm was real. They just let you live in its shadow. The silence of others becomes your evidence. The lack of visible resistance becomes your shame, and your voice, once clear, becomes a threat to your own place in the group. You adjust, you conform, you shrink, not because they forced you, but because they convinced you that everyone else already had. Weaponized secrets. Some people don't earn your trust. They extract it. Slowly, gently, carefully. They listen when you're vulnerable, nod with warmth, offer safety. You feel seen, heard, safe, and so you open up. You share the story no one else knows. The pain you hide from the world, the guilt, the trauma, the truth. And then when the time is right, they use it against you. Weaponized secrets is the manipulation tactic of gaining your trust to extract private, sensitive information and then using it to shame, threaten, control, or humiliate you. Sometimes the threat is explicit. Other times, it's a quiet reminder that they know more about you than anyone else. Either way, the message is the same. Your truth is no longer yours. It's leverage. This tactic works because disclosure builds intimacy. Psychologically, sharing secrets activates oxytocin, the bonding hormone. The more you reveal, the more emotionally attached you become. And once a manipulator has that bond, they can twist it into power. The moment you open up, you give them a loaded weapon, one that doesn't have to be fired to control you. Just knowing they could is often enough. You see this tactic used in abusive relationships. A partner who once comforted your insecurities now uses them in arguments. No wonder your ex left. Everyone would hate you if they knew what you told me. They say it softly, casually, with a smirk, not to resolve the conflict, but to put you back in your place. And you feel it immediately, the regret, the shame, the fear. You wonder if you can ever speak freely again. In cults and authoritarian groups, confession is often mandatory. Followers are asked to share their flaws, sins, and thoughts, all in the name of spiritual growth or loyalty. But once recorded, these confessions become tools of discipline. Step out of line, and they resurface. Speak against the leader, and your private shame becomes public ammunition. Even in friendships or families, this tactic appears. The relative who stores your secrets as gossip fuel. The friend who accidentally leaks what you told them in confidence. The parent who throws your pain back at you when you try to set boundaries. They don't need to invent lies. They just take your truth and twist it. And here's the most destructive part. It doesn't just make you mistrust them. It makes you mistrust yourself. You become cautious, quiet, guarded. Not because you're secretive, but because you've learned that vulnerability is dangerous. That trust can be a trap. Over time, you learn to withhold even from those who deserve your truth. You become emotionally armored, safe, but isolated. And every time you silence your voice out of fear of how it might be used, the manipulator wins again. Because the weapon wasn't the secret, it was the silence that followed. Emotional boomerang. You try to explain how you're hurting and end up comforting the person who hurt you. You bring up a betrayal and they cry harder than you do. You say, "That was painful," and they look at you like you're the one who inflicted it. This is emotional boomerang, a psychological tactic where the victim's feelings are deflected, reversed, and used against them. You open up, they redirect. Now you're not talking about what they did. You're defending your tone, your character, your right to feel anything at all. The roots of this dynamic lie in the theory of projection and emotional invalidation, both long studied by psychologists like Karen Horney and Marshall Rosenberg. But this isn't just miscommunication, it's strategic emotional redirection. The manipulator can't, or won't, hold space for their own guilt, shame, or responsibility, so they dump it back on you, instantly, aggressively, or worse, with practiced fragility. You end up being punished for your vulnerability. One of the most disturbing historical parallels comes from the post-slavery era in the American South, particularly during the Jim Crow era. When Black Americans began to voice grievances, demanding dignity, justice, equality. The emotional narrative was flipped. Southern white leaders, especially in literature and propaganda, positioned themselves as the aggrieved, the wounded, the ones being attacked. They painted themselves as victims of change, of northern aggression, of racial uprising. And in that reversal, the legitimate cries of pain were silenced, replaced by false narratives of persecution. Power turned its own guilt into fuel and made the victims feel ashamed for speaking at all. That's emotional boomerang on a national scale. In modern relationships, it looks like this. I felt abandoned when you shut down. Oh, great. Now I'm the villain again. I guess I can't feel anything without being blamed. Or, that joke humiliated me. You're too sensitive. I was just trying to lighten the mood. I can never do anything right, can I? You try to process pain and end up managing their pain instead. The psychology behind this is brutal. Emotional boomeranging exploits empathetic reflex, the human tendency to comfort distress, even when it's misplaced. If you're highly empathetic, you fold first. You soften. You forget why the conversation started. Meanwhile, the manipulator has successfully dodged responsibility and absorbed the spotlight. Again, in families, it might sound like, "Mom, when you say those things, I feel small. After all I've done for you. This is how you treat me." In cults, it's weaponized shame. Question the doctrine. You're accused of hurting the group's energy, express doubt, and you're exiled for negativity. In politics, it's reframed as victimhood culture. Powerful institutions twist criticism into persecution, call out abuse, and suddenly they're the ones under attack. And here's where it gets darker. Over time, you don't just stop expressing your emotions. You stop trusting them. You begin rehearsing every sentence in your mind. You begin apologizing before you even speak. You learn to walk on eggshells around the person who wronged you because you've been taught that your pain is dangerous. This isn't miscommunication, it's emotional domination. A system designed to reverse blame, distort reality, and train you to bury your own voice. The more you speak, the worse you feel. And eventually, silence starts to look like safety. But it isn't safety, it's surrender. In psychology, instrumental helplessness refers to the strategic use of perceived incapacity to influence others' behavior. It's not that someone truly can't, it's that they benefit from pretending they can't. Perpetual incompetence is a dark version of this tactic. It's when a person consistently underperforms, forgets, or fails in ways that shift responsibility onto others. Not because of actual incapacity, but because it keeps them in control without appearing controlling. Unlike overt manipulation, this strategy hides behind failure. It weaponizes incompetence to avoid accountability, effort, or blame. And it works especially well in environments filled with empathy, urgency, or emotional labor. The mechanism is simple. They fail. You take over. You feel pressure to get things done, to keep things from falling apart, to avoid embarrassment or discomfort. So, you step in. At first, it's a gesture of help. Eventually, it becomes a pattern. That you write the email, plan the trip, regulate the emotions, apologize to others, fix the mess. They watch and repeat. In relationships, it often sounds like, "I'm just bad at this," or "You're so much better at it than me." In workplaces, it's the colleague who forgets the process every time, so you do the task for them. But the most revealing sign is selective competence. They can focus when they want to, remember details that matter to them, perform just fine when the reward benefits them directly. And yet, when responsibility arises, the helplessness returns. Psychologist Martin Seligman's research on learned helplessness showed how animals subjected to uncontrollable stress eventually gave up trying to escape, even when escape was possible. But in the case of perpetual incompetence, the helplessness isn't learned, it's performed. The manipulator creates the same exhaustion in others without suffering any consequences themselves. Over time, the more competent partner or colleague becomes overloaded, burnt out, and resentful, not just from doing more, but from being expected to do more, while the other remains oddly untouched. Historically, governments and institutions have used bureaucratic incompetence as a shield against accountability. The state claims it can't move faster. The system is broken. The leaders didn't know, but the results benefit those in power. Cases are delayed, change is stalled, responsibility is diluted across so many hands that no one, even in cults or high-control environments, leaders may feign ignorance about financial abuse, member mistreatment, or internal manipulation. I trusted the wrong people, they say. I didn't realize what was happening, and the damage remains, while the illusion of helplessness protects the guilty. Perpetual incompetence is powerful because it disarms anger. You're not dealing with defiance or cruelty. You're dealing with someone who claims they just can't. And that's the trap. They make you feel like the controlling one, the critical one, the one who asks for too much. But there's nothing innocent about repeated incapacity that always shifts effort to someone else. It's not failure. It's delegation through deception. And when you carry both sides of the relationship, the thinking and the doing, you're not just helping them function, you're helping them opt out of growth. And they're not grateful. They're comfortable. False equivalence. In logic, a false equivalence is a fallacy where two unlike things are treated as if they're the same. But in dark psychology, it's more than just bad reasoning. It's a deliberate distortion. It's used to blur lines between right and wrong, guilty and innocent, victim and abuser. By presenting two actions or people as morally equal when they are not, the manipulator avoids accountability and shifts blame back onto the person who is trying to stand up or speak out. It turns truth into ambiguity and turns justice into noise. This technique often appears in emotionally charged situations, where clarity would be damaging to the manipulator. For example, if one person screams in frustration after weeks of emotional neglect, and the other calmly lies and gaslights, the manipulator will claim, "We both lash out. We're both toxic." That statement may sound fair on the surface, but it hides a power imbalance. One action was a defensive outburst. The other was strategic deception. Equating them isn't neutral, it's false. It devalues harm, confuses witnesses, and pressures the victim to silence themselves to appear fair. Psychologically, this taps into a phenomenon known as cognitive flattening, where emotional or moral complexity is reduced to surface similarities. It's easier, especially for bystanders or outsiders, to say both sides are wrong than to confront the discomfort of choosing a side. Social psychologist Lee Ross, known for studying the fundamental attribution error, explained how people tend to favor situational neutrality, especially when conflict is uncomfortable, even if neutrality enables abuse. In personal relationships, this is a common pattern. In toxic conflict loops, one partner lies, manipulates, or controls. The other finally erupts or withdraws. Instead of addressing the root harm, the manipulator zooms in on the reaction. "You're no better than me. You yelled too." And suddenly, the person trying to resist becomes indistinguishable from the one who caused the harm. The argument isn't about the original betrayal anymore. It's about tone, timing, or emotional control. This deflection forces the target into self-defense and robs them of the space to be heard. In workplaces, a similar tactic occurs when whistleblowers are labeled as difficult or unprofessional. Yes, the manager was abusive, but you raised your voice in that meeting. Remember, both of you handled things poorly. HR hears both sides. Conflict gets dismissed as a personality clash. But one person exploited power, the other reacted to survive it. These are not the same, but false equivalence makes them feel like they are. Historically, false equivalence has been a central tool in political propaganda. During the Cold War, authoritarian regimes like the USSR would highlight racism and inequality in the West as a way to defend their own oppression. Yes, we silence dissent, but look at your police brutality. You're just as bad. That framing allowed brutality to go unchallenged, because every accusation was met with a counter-accusation. This mirrors the modern tactic of whataboutism, deflecting any criticism by saying, "Well, what about the bad things you did?" It's a trap. It offers no resolution, only paralysis. In media, this fallacy is even more dangerous. A scientist and a conspiracy theorist are placed side by side on a panel to represent both views. A hate group, and a civil rights group are shown as ideological opposites instead of moral opposites. This balanced framing gives fringe, harmful ideas the illusion of legitimacy, and it trains the public to treat truth and fiction as interchangeable. But the most damaging impact of false equivalence isn't external, it's internal. And over time, the victim begins to doubt themselves. You remember losing your temper once, so you begin to believe that maybe you were just as bad. Maybe your pain was dramatic. Maybe your resistance was cruelty. And the moment you start equating your response to their abuse, you lose your voice. You stop speaking up, not because the harm stopped, but because you're not sure you deserve to. And that's the darkest part of this trick. It turns resistance into guilt. It silences truth with pseudo-fairness. It blurs the lines until morality is subjective, until harm is mutual, until nothing is clear and nothing is punishable. A slap and a scream, a lie and a confrontation, a predator and a protester. Not all things are equal, but if the manipulator succeeds, you'll treat them as if they are, and hold yourself accountable for what they did to you. Forced forgiveness. Forgiveness is often seen as the final step in healing, a sign of maturity, compassion, closure. But in the wrong hands, forgiveness becomes a weapon. Forced forgiveness is the manipulation tactic, where a person demands, pressures, or morally coerces you to let go of the harm they caused, not because they've changed, not because they've taken responsibility, but because your pain has become inconvenient for them. This isn't spiritual, it's strategic. The goal is not reconciliation, it's silence. In psychology, forgiveness is a complex process involving empathy, self-protection, and boundary repair. It's not automatic, it's not owed. According to trauma researcher Dr. Banya Fisher, true forgiveness requires safety. Without safety, forgiveness becomes submission, and in the context of abuse or manipulation, it becomes a performance, a ritual where the victim is expected to make peace while the abuser skips accountability. The tactic works by reframing your refusal to forgive as the new offense. You're so bitter. You're just holding a grudge. Real healing means moving on. Now, instead of confronting what they did, you're defending your right to still feel hurt. It shifts the spotlight. Their cruelty fades. Your resistance becomes the problem. In religious or moral communities, this manipulation becomes even more dangerous. Forgiveness is preached as an absolute virtue. Anger is framed as sin. Speaking about harm is seen as gossip. The person who caused the damage is shielded by doctrine, while the one still bleeding is told to smile and be kind. But this isn't redemption, it's erasure. The past is buried, but the wound is still open. The abuser says, "I apologized," or worse, "I said sorry, what else do you want?" As if their brief admission resets reality, as if their image deserves peace more than you deserve healing. In families, forced forgiveness sounds like, "They're your father, you have to forgive him. She's old, let it go." That was a long time ago. But the damage lives on. The child becomes the adult, still expected to protect the parent's reputation. The person who was hurt is forced to comfort the person who hurt them. And if they don't, they're punished with guilt, shame, or emotional exile. This isn't healing, it's emotional laundering. It makes everything look clean on the outside, while rot continues beneath the surface. Historically, this tactic has been used in transitional justice systems to pacify victims quickly and avoid deeper conflict. In South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, victims of apartheid violence were encouraged to forgive their torturers in exchange for a public confession. While the program aimed to prevent civil war, critics like Mamdani and Wilson noted that it often failed to deliver true justice. Many perpetrators never faced consequences. Victims were left to carry the burden of peace while their abusers walked free. And globally, we still call that forgiveness, even when it feels like surrender. Forced forgiveness is powerful because it isolates the victim. You're no longer allowed to feel angry. You're no longer allowed to ask questions. Everyone around you says, "Be the bigger person." But here's what they don't tell you. Being the bigger person doesn't mean shrinking yourself into silence. And forgiveness given under pressure isn't healing. It's coercion. Manipulators demand forgiveness, not because they want to reconnect, but because they want your memory erased, your silence, your emotional reset. They want the benefit of your peace without the cost of their change. They want the title of forgiven more than they want to be safe for you. And the longer you're told to move on, the more you'll feel like the problem. Until one day, you stop bringing it up, you stop mentioning it, you bury it quietly. Not because it healed, but because you were taught that your pain made people uncomfortable. That's not forgiveness. That's submission. Boundary testing loop. In manipulation, boundaries are not something to be respected. They are obstacles to be tested. Boundary testing loop is a psychological tactic where someone repeatedly violates, challenges, or pushes against your personal limits, not to understand you better, but to find out how far they can go without consequence. It's not about ignorance. It's not a mistake. It's a slow, calculated erosion, one push at a time. This tactic operates like a compliance test, a concept studied in social psychology by researchers like Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo. The principle is simple. If you can get someone to tolerate a small violation, they're more likely to tolerate a larger one later. So the manipulator starts small, a joke that crosses a line, a touch that lingers too long, a question that's too personal. If you don't push back, they try again. If you do push back, they laugh it off. Relax. I didn't mean it like that. You're too sensitive. The goal isn't to respect your line. It's to find out how easy it is to move it. Over time, this becomes a loop. Each violation is followed by denial, minimization, or a fake apology. They reset the damage and then they try again. And the longer it goes on, the more confused you become. Your original boundaries start to feel unreasonable. You begin to second-guess yourself. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I should be more open. But what's really happening is that your resistance is being measured and conditioned. In psychology, this process mirrors desensitization and extinction curves. In behavioral conditioning, repeated exposure to a boundary breach without clear negative reinforcement causes the response to weaken. You react less, you tolerate more, and eventually, your silence becomes permission. In relationships, this tactic is often disguised as testing chemistry. One partner pushes intimacy, speed, or emotional access faster than the other is ready for. If you flinch, they act offended, or act ascended, or act ascended. One distorted as just a joke becomes just a night, then just one mistake, then a pattern. And by the time you realize your lines have disappeared, you're already deep inside a dynamic where consent, space, and autonomy have been slowly dismantled. In families, boundary testing shows up when parents demand emotional access from adult children. You didn't tell me where you went. Why didn't you answer my call? The tone is innocent, even caring, but the underlying message is clear. Your independence is not respected. Your no is a negotiation. In high-control groups and cults, boundary testing is systematized. New members are asked to reveal personal secrets under the guise of trust exercises. They're asked to give up small freedoms, to comply with minor rules. Once those are accepted, the demands increase. The point is never obedience for its own sake. The point is data. How much will you tolerate? How quickly will you adjust? And when will you break? The loop works because each step seems insignificant on its own. No single violation feels big enough to leave over, but cumulatively, they dismantle your sense of self. And once your boundaries have been tested enough, you stop defending them, not because you agree, but because you've been taught that resistance doesn't matter. And that's the darkest part. By the time they cross a major line, it no longer feels like a breach. It feels like the next logical step. You've been groomed to comply, not through violence, but through repetition. That's not misunderstanding. It's engineering. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But when a manipulator hijacks your narrative, you no longer control any part of it, not even your own memories. Narrative hijacking is the tactic of redefining events, roles, and meaning to serve the manipulator's version of the truth. It's not just lying. It's narrative warfare. They don't deny what happened. They rewrite it, They recast themselves as the hero, the victim, the wise guide, while you become unstable, dramatic, ungrateful, or cruel. And the longer you're exposed to their version, the harder it becomes to hold on to your own. This tactic exploits the core psychological truth that memory is reconstructive, not photographic. According to research by cognitive psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, the brain constantly edits and reshapes memory based on later information, emotion, and suggestion. When someone insists, again and again, that you misunderstood, that's not how it happened, you're exaggerating, or everyone else remembers it differently, they're not just arguing, they're performing cognitive surgery, and your mind, in its natural desire to resolve conflict and avoid shame, begins to edit itself to match their story. In abusive relationships, this can sound subtle. I never said that. You're taking it out of context. You always twist things. The goal isn't to win the argument, it's to control the record. You start walking away from confrontations, wondering if maybe you did get too emotional, maybe you did misread it, and piece by piece, your story starts to blur. You remember the pain, but not the proof. You remember the impact, but not the details. And without details, the story collapses. Narrative hijacking is especially effective in public or group dynamics. In families, the manipulator gets ahead of you. They tell others you're sensitive, unstable, or selfish before you've even spoken. So when you finally do speak, your version of events is already contaminated. In cults and ideological groups, dissidents are preemptively labeled as dangerous, bitter, or no longer aligned. Their exit is framed as weakness. Their silence is framed as proof. And their past contributions are erased from the story altogether. Historically, this tactic has been used in regimes to bury atrocities under rewritten narratives. After the Rwandan genocide, survivors watched as perpetrators re-entered society and began shaping a softer version of events, claiming ignorance, mutual blame, or emotional confusion. In post-conflict zones across Latin America, regimes controlled textbooks, newspapers, and media to redefine violence as necessary and dissent as treason. When a government controls the story, justice is no longer about truth. It's about who gets to speak. What makes narrative hijacking so dangerous is its subtlety. It doesn't feel like violence. It feels like perspective. But behind the calm tone is erasure. Your reality is being overwritten. And when you finally explode, when you finally push back, they point to your reaction as proof that their version was right all along. See how emotional you are. This is why I said you're unstable. And the longer this continues, the more isolated you feel. Not just from others, but from yourself. Because if you can't trust your memory, your timeline, or your voice, what's left? That's not misunderstanding. That's narrative control. And in the hands of a manipulator, the story doesn't just change. It turns against you. Emotional blackmail is a form of psychological extortion, a manipulation tactic where someone uses your fear, guilt, or sense of obligation as leverage to control your behavior. It's not physical force. It's not a loud threat. It's quiet, intimate, and corrosive. The message is always the same. If you don't do what I want, something bad will happen, and it'll be your fault. The term was popularized by psychotherapist Susan Forward, who described emotional blackmail as a 6-stage cycle: demand, resistance, pressure, threat, compliance, and repetition. The manipulator starts with a demand. If you hesitate, they apply emotional pressure. You're hurting me. I thought you cared. If you walk away, I don't know what I'll do. The threat doesn't need to be explicit. Sometimes it's just a look, a pause, a reminder of what happened the last time you said no. And if you comply, the pattern locks in. The blackmail worked, so it will be used again. This tactic is especially dangerous because it weaponizes intimacy. The closer you are to the manipulator, the more leverage they have. In relationships, it can sound like, if you really loved me, you'd stay. In families, after everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me. In workplaces, we're counting on you, don't let us down. What makes it dark is the moral twist. You're not just making a choice, you're made to feel like a villain for protecting yourself. The manipulator disguises control as vulnerability. They play the victim to make you feel like the perpetrator. And over time, your sense of right and wrong gets hijacked. You stop asking what you want and start calculating what will cause the least damage. Psychologically, this taps into internalized guilt conditioning. When someone has learned to associate boundary setting with betrayal, it often stems from childhood dynamics where affection was conditional or where a caregiver's needs always took priority. And so, as an adult, the manipulator finds the softest place in your mind, the part that wants peace, approval, or safety, and they squeeze it. In cults and high-control groups, emotional blackmail becomes doctrine. Leaving the group is framed as moral failure. You're turning your back on truth. If you leave, you're abandoning your family, your mission, your soul. It's not just leaving, it's treason. And the threat is not punishment, it's disgrace. What makes emotional blackmail so effective is that it creates invisible cages. No threats are written down. No commands are spoken aloud. But your world shrinks, your choices narrow, and every no becomes a risk. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to untangle where their needs end. And your fear begins. You stay, you comply, and not because you want to, but because saying no feels like setting off a bomb. And eventually, you start thinking like a hostage, calculating tone, managing responses, weighing escape. But here's the truth. They won't tell you. If love has to be earned through guilt, if freedom costs someone else's breakdown, if peace depends on your silence, it's not love, it's leverage. In psychological warfare, silence isn't always the strongest weapon. Sometimes, it's suggestion. Reputation assassination is the strategic act of slowly destroying someone's credibility through subtle implication, misdirection, and selective disclosure. It's not about proof, it's about doubt. The manipulator doesn't need to provide evidence, they just need to plant the right seed. I don't want to say too much, but something's off about them. I used to trust them until you didn't hear it from me. The words are casual, but the consequences are permanent. This tactic relies on the primacy effect in cognitive psychology, the tendency for first impressions to stick, even in the face of contradictory evidence. Once someone is framed as untrustworthy, unstable, or manipulative, everything they do is viewed through that lens. A calm explanation becomes defensiveness, a boundary becomes aggression, and a cry for help becomes manipulation. The damage is done long before the target even knows they're being smeared. In relationships, reputation assassination often begins before the breakup. The manipulator rewrites the narrative early, portraying the target as the problem, jealous, irrational, emotionally volatile. So when the relationship ends and the target finally speaks up, no one listens. We heard about you already. They said you'd say something like this. It's preemptive discrediting, a form of social insulation, ensuring that their version of events is the one people believe. In family systems, it's used to isolate. A parent may quietly turn siblings against each other through favoritism and planted doubts. She's always been dramatic. You know how he twists things. Over time, the family doesn't question what's true. They question who's worth listening to. The target becomes the outlier, not because of their behavior, but because their reputation was weakened before they spoke. In cults and authoritarian groups, this tactic is systematized. When someone begins to question the doctrine, leadership leaks narratives about their disloyalty. They've been unstable lately. They're no longer aligned with our values. The group is taught to fear them or pity them, but never to believe them. And when the person finally leaves, their words are treated as bitterness, not truth. In some regimes, whistleblowers are publicly discredited with manufactured scandals. Their past is re-examined, their motives smeared, their credibility shattered. The public never sees the truth, only the edited version designed to destroy trust. Psychologically, this is a form of character assassination through social triangulation. The manipulator recruits allies without exposing themselves. They don't make public accusations, they just tilt perception. And when the victim reacts with confusion, anger, or desperation, their reaction becomes further proof. See how emotional they are. This is what I warned you about. The most disturbing part is how effective this is in digital spaces. One vague post, one misleading screenshot, one half story, and reputations collapse. Online, where nuance dies and attention spans fade, the suggestion is stronger than the truth. A lie spreads fast. The correction never catches up, and the result is isolation. The target finds themselves alone, confused and defensive, not because they were wrong, but because the people around them were already taught not to listen. They're not just fighting for truth, they're fighting to be heard at all. Reputation assassination doesn't destroy you with bullets. It destroys you with rumors. It rewrites who you are before you can speak. And by the time you tell your story, it's already too late. You've been edited out of your own life. Constructed dependency. Constructed dependency is one of the most effective and least recognized forms of control. It doesn't involve force. It doesn't need threats. It simply makes the victim need the manipulator. It's the engineered creation of emotional, financial, psychological, or social reliance, so that leaving, resisting, or even questioning becomes unthinkable. It's not love. It's not loyalty. It's a cage, built over time, disguised as care. In psychology, this tactic mirrors patterns found in coercive control, a term developed by sociologist Evan Stark to describe how abusers slowly dismantle a victim's autonomy without physical violence. The method is slow, strategic, and devastating. First, the manipulator offers help, comfort, support. They make themselves indispensable. They become the one you go to for advice, validation, resources. At first, it feels like trust, like partnership. But step by step, your independence erodes. You begin to rely on them for decisions, emotions, even identity. In romantic relationships, it might begin with financial support. Don't worry, I'll take care of the bills. Then your job becomes too stressful. You quit. Your world shrinks. They manage the money. Soon, they manage everything. The same happens emotionally. You can always talk to me. No one else gets you like I do. Over time, your social circle fades. Friends are toxic. Family is jealous. Outsiders don't understand. And now, you don't just live with them. You live through them. In cults, this strategy is refined to a science. New recruits are love-bombed, then slowly separated from their former lives. Jobs, family, even diet is controlled. Dependency is constructed not by accident, but by design. You need the group for food, housing, meaning, identity. Leaving isn't just scary, it's existential collapse. In families, constructed dependency can span decades. Parents raise children to remain tethered emotionally and financially well into adulthood. They make independence feel like betrayal. You don't care about us anymore. We sacrificed everything for you, and the child, now grown, still feels trapped, even when free. What makes this tactic dark is how invisible it becomes. There are no chains, just routines, just patterns, just what works. And the victim often doesn't realize what's happened until they try to say no, and feel guilty, until they try to leave, and feel terrified. The dependency isn't just logistical, it's internalized. They stop believing they can function without the manipulator's guidance, approval, or resources. And here's the final trap. If they do break away, they often collapse. Not because they're weak, but because they were never allowed to build the skills, confidence, or autonomy to survive alone. The manipulator didn't just make them dependent, they kept them underdeveloped. That's not love, that's control, dressed as protection. In systems of oppression, colonialism, authoritarianism, cults, this is how the powerful stay powerful, not by constant force, but by constant provision. You don't rebel against the hand that feeds you, even if it's the same hand that chained you there. Constructed dependency doesn't just remove your freedom, it convinces you that freedom is dangerous, that freedom is selfish, that freedom will destroy you, and if they succeed, you won't even want it.